right, well, I'll go ahead and kick us off. Appreciate everyone being here tonight. This is the working group committee. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order on the county side. Chairman Yurchek, I'll defer to you.
We will call the meeting to order for the Union County Board of Education side.
And Dr. Webb, if you'll just start and make our introductions, we'll just go right around the room.
Thank you, Commissioner Akins. Mike Webb, Union County Public Schools, work in the area of instructional technology and building operations.
Mary Ellis, Superintendent, Union County Public Schools.
Kevin Stewart, Union County School Board Facilities Chair.
Emily Scholl, Union County parent, one in elementary and one in middle school.
Good evening, I'm Kimberly Marston Hansley. I have two students here in the district, one at CADA, one at Western Union, and one that's gone through, but Parkwood / Pender County, Pender Patriot. Glad to be with you guys this evening.
And I'm Richard Yurchek, parent of two kids in Union County Public Schools, one at Monroe Middle School and one at Rocky River. Oh, I'm also the chairman of the Board of Education.
Robert Dixon, I'm managing partner in Rockus Capital.
I am Amy Bernard. I have two kids in Union County Schools. I have both of them in Western Union now. In school.
I'm Richard Helms, County Commissioner.
Cindy Cotto, County Manager.
Jeff Yates, Union County Administrative Services, and I too have two kids at Western Union.
I'm Frank Akins, County Commissioner.
I'm Randy Adcock. I'm just a banker. I am a local all my life here with Parkwood, Prospect. My kids went to Prospect and Parkwood. Have a lot of family ties.
I'm Britt Hadley, the proud grandfather of three beautiful granddaughters, one a senior at Porter Ridge, one a senior at Weddington, and one a fifth grader at Wesley Chapel.
Very good. All right, well, with that, we will move into the elections of co-chairs. So we'll open up the floor for any nominations.
Frank, the Board of Education Working Group, Union County Public Schools Working Group, we have asked Reverend Hadley if he would be our co-chair.
All right, very good. Anybody on the county side want to be nominated, or anybody want to nominate anyone to be the chair?
I would throw out humbly to y'all folks, since this is a working group that is designed and built around the six people that are not part of the general day-to-day process or not elected, that I think that it should be one of the three.
We've already established that, but yes, we agree.
I'm nominating Amy.
What?
All in favor? Aye.
Well, she has an opportunity to, would you be interested?
I'll do it unless, who else wants to do it?
Looks like it's you.
Okay, I'll do it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. We'll let you two now run the meeting.
Okay. I'll start, Amy, if you don't mind, and you jump in and we'll just do it together. And I'll let ladies go first, whichever you'd like to do, which that makes a difference. But in terms of reviewing the statutory process of the working group, I think it's pretty evident to all of us as it's come down from state legislature. Session Law 2014-9, I'll just read that because I guess that's the direction that we're to go in and what our goal mission is to be. On or before August 1st, 2014, the Union County Board of Commissioners and Union County Board of Education shall jointly establish a working group to develop a multi-year plan to address existing and ongoing capital needs of Union County Board of Education. The working group shall consist of up to 14 people, half appointed by each board. The working group shall complete its work and report to Union County Board of Commissioners and the Union County Board of Education on or before June 30th, 2015. That's what I would submit as our purpose for being together for the next months. Any comment on that or any? Richard, please.
I'd like to say, I mean, I think this is a fantastic opportunity for us to sit down together and understand the needs of the county. And I'm looking forward to this being a catalyst to develop a working relationship that will take us years in the future. I welcome the opportunity.
I certainly would concur with Richard, and we know the task that, I don't any of us would want to be a county commissioner, but certainly the hard work and just determining the needs within all the different organizations, groups that you have beneath you as county commissioners, and to be able to fund all of that, I know has got to be an immense challenge to you, and we're really thrilled to present our needs and to do it with vim and vigor, and we're looking forward to the chance to work with you too, Richard.
Now that you've nominated me co-chair, I feel like I need to talk. I am really excited to be here, and as a parent, I'm really excited to be involved and understand more of what's going on, and I have very positive thoughts. I feel like we can do a lot of good, and I will do my part to make that happen. I hope everyone else will too.
Let's look at the ground rules for the working group of our group, and that of course comes from one of us. And let me just share with you what those are, and I'll make them very concise. Is how we would define those, or I would define those. The ground rule number one would be collaboration, and I guess the way I want to speak to that with you folks is that it's just nothing more than cooperative intent. That we do, like Amy said, we seek to meet each other in the middle.
Reverend, I don't mean to interrupt.
I'm sorry.
Where are you in the paperwork? Is this, I'm afraid I'm not looking at the right things.
They were submitted to Ms. Coto.
To the on the email?
On the email,
Yes,
they're on the
when
email
I sent
Ms.
the
Coto sent to
email
you.
yesterday with our presentation,
Okay.
they are embedded in that email
I do
from
have
Dr.
one.
Ellis. And if we need to make copies, I'm more than happy to do so.
I'm sorry, I said you had that, so I could have made copies of that, please forgive me.
No. I was just under the impression that these were the same and they're not.
Here, what I can do is
Show
I
me
can
the
give you
picture of
a
it.
copy of what I have, which was embedded in Dr. Ellis's email, if that is helpful.
Is it the email? I have it.
Okay, there's seven of them, maybe. Like I say, I'll be very brief. The first one, we just repeated collaboration, us certainly remaining with cooperative intent, meeting each other in the middle. All of us so eager to do what's right for education within the students of Union County Public Schools. Mutual respect, I would define that as individual and group dignity, and tell you I think that really matters. Matters just doesn't at church and other places, but it matters in what we're going to be doing. So this is a public forum, and how we treat each other is really significant. And I hope that we'll remember mutual respect. Candor, again, you might say that would be no posturing, speak the truth openly and honestly. And I think we're all adults and we have the capacity to be able to do that. Constructive discussion, always keeping in mind that the outcomes of our decisions and our work together really does matter, and to be sure to put the faces of children and youth on all of our capital needs that we discover, as well as funding options that we decide upon. Shared responsibilities would mean be willing to do whatever it takes, whatever the cost, whatever the price. That's not a sermon I'm trying to preach. It's just really what we all ought to be doing, because this is significant business, not because it's been mandated out of Raleigh, but because it's really the heart of who we are as residents in this county that love our children and youth and their families. No blame casting. I hope that the past can be the past, that we can remove as best we can if there should be any hidden agendas or damaged egos, that we can just be one together and form a group honestly and clearly that care for each other and for what comes out of our group. And then finally, no discussion of the ongoing appeal as the outcome is unknown and does not a need to affect or determine existing and ongoing capital needs of the Board of Education. It's really a waste of time and energy to go back and rehash the appeal because it is unknown. Outcomes are not determined at this point and may not be even before our task as a working group is complete. Certainly will be, that report will be turned in to both boards by June the 30th, 2015. That's just what we would like to submit as ground rules. Some people think those are ridiculous. We ought to all be mature enough to, but I've never worked coming out of not just the ministry, but corporate America. It is so important for us to establish the way we're going to deal and treat each other. And so that's what we submit.
May I say something?
Yes.
This should have gone a few minutes earlier, but there's a lot of water under the bridge with many of us around the table discussing things, talking about things. All of us have our interests, but at heart, I feel like we're all Union County citizens. And I know, at least from the group of people that are in my world, a lot of eyes are on this group to say, is it really possible that positive could happen, you know, and is it really possible? And that's why I'm especially looking forward to this, because I hope that we can look forward to, as Britt said, look forward as opposed to looking back, and for the betterment of the entire county, because it's not just the schools, it's the entire county. So I just hope that that's what can happen.
Maybe why don't you take number 6, especially since it's y'all.
Are you going to adopt those ground rules?
Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you, thank you. Could we have a motion to adopt those ground rules? Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chair, I move that we adopt the ground rules as presented.
A second?
I was gonna say, Amy was getting ready to say something.
There's just a little bit of confusion about what rules of order we are following.
Yeah.
As far as motions, seconds, and just general calls to order.
We normally work under Robert's Rules of Order, and then we go to the small government and school board if we need to out of Chapel Hill, but I don't know what do you guys use?
How Robert do you want to be?
I don't know, that's what I was just thinking was, for me and the other regular people, I don't know Robert's Rules of Order.
Yeah, I was gonna say, be sure that someone sitting next. At the next meeting, Amy, why don't we plan to sit beside each other?
Okay.
We can talk about the agenda, and then let's have somebody beside us that's the expert in the room on Robert's Rules of Orders. Robert's Rules of Order.
And actually, the county,
You don't,
operate under Robert's rules. We have our own procedures that we establish. We don't require seconds. So we operate a little bit differently than the
Right.
Board of Education, so.
can you give me those rules so at least we're following something?
Sure, I can do it. Yeah.
Okay, we can do that.
We can probably do a modified Robert's rules, so if there's something out there that we want to
Okay.
do, somebody should make a motion and then just ask for all in favor, or discussion, all in favor, those opposed, and we'll just kind of keep it.
More informal.
Yeah, this is going to be an ad hoc group. We need to be a little bit informal with each other. I think that's going to help with what Reverend Hadley just kind of went through as far as how we're going to work together. And I think that process too will lend itself to a little less formality, will lend itself to a little more candor and a little more working together and all of that, if that's okay.
That is completely okay with me. I would just suggest that we have something, because it seems like everybody's still a little nervous. We understand there is a lot of water under the bridge, like we said, and I just want everyone to be comfortable in talking.
Well, Robert's Rules is a fairly well-established and accepted, recognized form of committee management. and I've got a couple different books that we haven't shared.
Okay,
So-
I am happy to learn whatever
I
you want
think,
to do.
in my view is these sort of guidelines seem great. I think there are a few, I think that I don't see any issue in abiding by these in spirit and law.
And noting that they're different for each group, let's give each other the grace that we may need to talk about it some to come to a decision that I think grace is a pretty good thing, so I would hope that we would give it to one another.
I agree. Okay, fair enough. So are we okay with adopting these ground rules then?
We have a motion.
Motion.
Well, I actually have an issue with, I was gonna keep my mouth shut most of this meeting, but I guess here it comes.
Good.
I'm honored to be here. Hope I can help, and I think we all have that same feeling for being here. I do have 4 children here in Union County. One of them is actually off in college age by this point. The other 3 we homeschool. So actually, I don't really have a dog in this hunt. I don't have a favorite school. I don't have a favorite area. We farm our land, so I don't live in a neighborhood. So I'm not too worried about property valuations as far as that goes. What I've seen in the past, and I haven't been party to full conversations on both sides, but I do hope that we can get past history. I do hope that we can, because I got the sense this is going to be a marriage counseling session, basically, because we have 2 boards that quite honestly have been incapable of communicating equitably across. Now, we said there's no blame casting. I'm not placing blame. I'm saying that's the fact of where we are. So hopefully we can come here in a good spirit and do that. The item number G, no discussion of the ongoing appeal as the outcome is unknown, nor does it affect, etc. I think that's fair, but along the same terms, then we shouldn't discuss the lawsuit in general at all. The judgment, I don't think should be on the table. I think what we need to do is, in a vacuum, with the history, we need to look at what the needs are of this county. We need to establish a path forward that is fair and equitable to every member of the county, from the taxpayers to the children and the citizens. And along those lines, I hope that that is the direction that this working group is going. And that's kind of what I signed up for. So, with that stipulation, I don't have an issue with accepting it, but, I don't want to pick and choose. We can't talk about the appeal, but we're going to talk about the judgment. I say let's not talk about any of it. Let's talk about what the needs are. I know that there's been an in-depth study, and in full disclosure, I'm good friends with Dennis Yates, and I trust the man and his group, and they're very knowledgeable about architecture and plant and facilities. They will admit that they are not the experts in funding schemes. That's more of a
Financial word.
I'm sorry, that's more of a British term, and some of my past is coming out there. Where some of us on the board may have more idea of finance and ways to finance our needs. I think that we should do all that we can for the students. They are our future. I think we should not fall into the trap of, well, it's for the kids, so we're going to say yes to everything. We, in Union County, the individuals, the county, like everybody else in the world, are dealing with limited resources. Some more limited than others. I don't have Bill Gates' money, but Bill Gates has to allocate his resources responsibly and effectively, and I think that's what we're called to do here. So I'm looking forward to looking at the facts and working with everybody on an even field, and I'll say my piece.
For full disclosure, and I appreciate that, I think you need to know our presentation does mention $86 million in capital needs based on the jury award. Now, we don't talk about the appeal, but that we do mention that 86, and that's part and parcel of some of our funding.
Right.
So I need to say that up front, and that is not meant to offend anybody. We don't talk about the appeal at all. And I can gloss over that or whichever part it is, be glad to gloss over that, but I don't want that to come up and us have had this discussion and me not have fully disclosed that.
That's exactly why I brought it up, because I did look at the presentation right before I came over here, and thought it was fair that we mention it now, before we got into the presentation. That what I'd really like to focus on is the YCH study, where there was part of it in there, and effectively evaluate what are needs, what are wants, because hey, I'm there too. I mean, you know, personally, we all have needs and wants. The school system has needs and wants, and where do we allocate our limited resources? And I think that's the core question that this working group has been called to. We need roofs that don't leak. We need effective classrooms. We need the technology in place. We need extracurricular activities. But there's an unlimited spectrum that we can fund along those lines. So I think that's going to be where we have our conversation.
Well, let me just follow up to one thing that you were saying about the 86 million. I mean, that sounds like a pretty big number. Could you, whether today or a different day, talk about what that 86 million is?
do
Because
that
I think
tonight.
that kind of goes through what
We
you're
can do
saying.
that
Like,
tonight at
Are
9
those
o'clock.
all needs or are these all wants? What comes in $86 million? Go
Yeah,
ahead, I
I
didn't
think
want
we
to cut you
And
off.
are you talking about, Robert, you're talking about prioritizing needs and, you said needs, for what are needs, what are wants? I mean, I think we're all here to do what's best for everyone, I think, like I said, but are you talking about prioritizing?
Not necessarily prioritizing, and I don't have full information
Yeah.
to speak educate.
I'm just trying to understand where
but
you're going.
But where I'm going, and I know Cabarrus County had an issue with this recently, where the schools, like all school systems, need money, they need repair, they need new facilities, whatever, and they wound up spending several hundred, if not millions of dollars on a new football field.
Mhm.
And the question is was that a responsible use of that money? Were there other ways to accomplish the same outcome of a nice football facility and spend the money in the classroom? I mean, what's the goal of the schools? You know, are we creating college athletes, or are we creating well-rounded students? So I guess that's where I'm saying, where's the balance? How do we allocate? I'm not
So
saying
you
no
are
to football.
prioritizing.
Well, not necessarily prioritizing.
My son doesn't play football, so
Well, I did play football. I grew up near here, and I played football, and I enjoyed it. But the question is, do we spend $1 million on a football stadium, or do we spend $1 million on a classroom, or do we spend half and half? Do we spend? That's the question that I'm trying to get to.
Well,
And I think that's probably a conversation that we have later down the road, maybe not even tonight.
Right.
But I do want to get that out there, since a couple of the comments were made. I think you made the comment, at all costs.
I did.
And we can't do at all costs, unfortunately, as much as we'd like to,
Well,
because we have limited resources.
And I would hope that there is a general trust that, and I say it all the time, I don't think Dr. Ellis knows about running Union County, and I don't know that you all are experts at being a superintendent of schools. So if there's a mutual trust of one another that the money is being spent for the betterment of the students, for the betterment of the schools, for the betterment of the graduation rate and everything else, and that there's facts to back that up. There's information on the UCPS website to say what projects we're working on, what the status they're in, because one of the things that we've talked about, priorities is that they shift all the time. If you, if a roof collapses here, but you were planning to do this here, well then this becomes, the emergency. That's why I was asking if that's what you were talking about. But I think developing the mutual trust, that we trust in each other, that we're doing what's best within what we have to do with is it's well taken.
Absolutely, yes.
If I could just say that the discussion that we're having now is very valuable and very fruitful as we move forward. But I think we've gotten a little sidetracked from our agenda. I think we need to come back to where we were with the actual working agreements, if you will, and if there's anything that needs to be added, not to say the other side, but if there's anything else that needs to be added to that, any other input, I think we need to make a decision. There was a motion on the floor that we did not entertain, so if we could get back to there, I think that will help us.
Well, I think this is discussion on that motion.
Okay.
Because one of the line items on the motion is why the conversation came up.
So did you offer a substitute motion?
Well, I will say, just within full disclosure, within the conversation that we've had, that we do adopt these, and we adopt Robert's Rules of Orders for managing the committee meetings.
And to cover some of the things you were talking about, do we want to talk about being open and transparent and sharing all these numbers? Like I said, with the 86 million, can we drill that down like that? So if we
I
add,
think that's what we're here for. I think that'd be
yeah,
great,
so if we add transparency.
Yes.
All right.
I think that's an excellent, and I think one of the key parts of this, and part of it's in the presentation we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes, that transparency in this process is critical for the folks at home, for the residents, for the parents, for everybody involved, because we see, we're in the middle of this, and there's folks watching on TV, there's coverage from the media, and so forth. So I think transparency as we go forward and all the way is kind of a key value that we should have in this group.
So might I make the motion that we add the transparency, that we accept this with a modification of G, no discussion of the legal history.
Okay.
Wait a minute, so you're saying we're not gonna, so,
Well, let me,
I just want to make sure I understand, so I don't do something, I
No,
don't
no.
do the faux pas tonight.
No worries. My recommendation is if we're not going to discuss, which I think is fair and reasonable, the appeal and everything, let's not even discuss the judgment. Let's discuss what the county needs. Let's discuss what the school system needs.
Drill down that.
And drill down on those numbers. Let's
Okay.
focus on.
And I can say, as part of our budget this year, we sent over to the county exactly what that would be spent for, so that has already
Okay, so
been
you already
received.
have
Yes.
it. Okay.
Yes, so
So then-
you would have that at your disposal.
Yeah.
Mr. Co-Chair, I would be willing to entertain a friendly amendment to my motion to include Robert's Rules of Order in the discussion that has been brought forth thus far.
Noting that I'm gonna have to skip through a couple slides tonight, I don't want anybody to.
Does that include the addition of transparency to the list?
I have no exception with transparency. I gathered that was accepted by all of us.
second, is there a second to this?
And did that also include just the dropping of the past, like we said, dropping of the past history, the judgment and the appeal? So we're not going to reference the judgment and the
Well,
appeal?
I'm sorry, I just want to, maybe not reference those, but there were needs that were demonstrated during this trial. So those needs need to be talked about.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
I just
Yes.
want to understand
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
That's what I want.
That's what
I want to
was-
focus on the needs, not the
That's-
history
I
where,
gotcha,
yeah.
gotcha.
I want that
Yeah,
exactly.
because what my thinking was, we don't want to just say 86 million, it's the lawsuit because it is an appeal. Do
Check
we
the
want
box
to
and
go
move
down
on.
that whole
Sure.
thing? Let's just talk about it.
I think the 86 million in needs will stand regardless of the outcome of the lawsuit or the judgment. So I
Okay,
think
then
that
that's
you
how
make
we
the
want to talk
discussion.
about it.
Yeah.
And as an elected official, I want to say I've had conversations with Chairman Agnes, I've corresponded with Commissioner Helms, and I'm optimistic that we're moving in the right direction. If you ride around and take a look at Union County Public Schools, there's a lot of repairs underway, and that's due to the joint effort of the Board of Education and the county commissioners. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I'm optimistic we're heading in the right direction, but I will accept that as I said, as a friendly amendment to my motion. And I call the question, Mr. Co-Chair.
Noting that tonight you're gonna see the J word on there.
Fair enough.
Forgiveness going forward.
The question's been called. Amy Wright, question, Thompson.
I am so confused.
I'll second it.
Okay,
Did we
second.
second it?
Okay.
Yeah. And I think then we had the discussion. Discussion was out of
Somebody
order.
needs to give me that vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
No,
Okay.
So now Amy, call for a vote.
Okay, calling for a vote.
All those in favor?
All those in
of the
favor?
room. The vote is for
Yeah.
all of them.
Right.
Yes, all the room, everyone in the room.
Show of hands, ayes, what?
Aye.
Amy, are you voting yes?
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
You don't get to just be chair, you have to participate.
I'm telling you,
I
I
know.
love this book.
Okay, Amy, could you,
That was
could you
unanimous.
I'll tell you, it'll put you to sleep. But
It's okay.
take number 6?
Processes.
Okay, we next have the presentation of the recommended process by the county staff.
And that's Jeff Yates, our Administrative Services Director and CFO.
Well, wonderful, Jeff, you seem to know what you're doing.
Seem to, most
Yeah.
days. I apologize for everyone over here, because I tend to, my board knows, I can't stand behind the podium. It's old habit of being a teacher. I tend to move around quite a bit and when I do presentations. So for the folks watching at home, you'll hear a voice sometimes. You won't see me on TV because my camera don't move real well. So what we want to talk about is, and I think there's been lots of good constructive conversation to this point on both sides, and looking forward to kind of how we eat this elephant, if you will. You know, you've heard the expression, you can't really eat the elephant all in one bite. So how do you start the process? How do you start to move down the road of building this? Because I share Commissioner Helms' excitement and Mr. Stewart's excitement about this process, because I think it's an opportunity to reset and refocus the energies of both the county and the school system on how do we move forward and meet those needs? How do we get to come to a working plan and going forward? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're going to come up with a plan. We're going to give it to the Board of County Commissioners, and they're going to lean forward in the dais and look down to my seat and say, how do you move forward with this and funding it? So I think coming up with kind of the strategies and moving forward, it's a very important opportunity, and it's going to have long-reaching, long-lasting impacts, far-reaching, long-lasting impacts on our county. So what I want to do today is kind of give you what we would recommend as a process. I teach this class for finance officers around the country. How do you present capital needs? How do you prepare capital budgets and so forth? So what I've gone back to is best practices. How do you lay out a capital plan? What's the best strategy for moving forward? So this presentation today really, it's not a value judgment. It's more of an offering of, here's a roadmap for the group, and here's a recommendation for how we move forward. I know Dr. Ellis is going to get into a little bit later some of the history and some of those other components. So we won't spend a lot of time, or I won't spend any time on that in my presentation. Again, kind of going back to the joint working group, I kind of peeled out what I think probably is the critical part of the working group task from the General Assembly to develop that multi-year plan to address existing and ongoing capital needs. And I thought it was very appropriate we had the conversation about the $86 million, because I share the same concern. The $86 million, the important parts of that and the needs parts of that will still remain after the fact. So how do we go forward? You know, several folks in here have kids at Western Union, all over the school system, and if you're in those schools, you do know that they have issues. So it's, you know, it's at the end of the day, we need to try to wrap our arms around all the needs and come up with a plan for how to address all those needs, regardless of where we are in court, where we are anywhere else. So I'm excited to hear that that kind of conversation kind of started off going down the road, because I was thinking the same thing. We've had some conversations with staff on our side as to, you know, concerns about how do we proceed, how do we kind of not step in that quagmire and going forward. So I'm glad you kind of brought that up. And Dr. Ellis, I wholeheartedly believe in, when you put it in your presentation, I was like, I'm glad we're going to even at least talk about the needs aspect of that. So key principles. As we kind of work through any capital planning process or any planning process that we would undertake, what we want to be sure is we kind of lay out what we're trying to achieve. You know, I'm a firm believer if you aim for nothing, you hit it every time. So, you know, in this case, what I think is if we create a plan at the end of the day that hits these 6 boxes, if you will, the check boxes, then I think we're successful going forward. And being the finance guy, I always put fiscal sustainability number 1. But these could be really in any order that you'd want them to be. Fiscal sustainability meaning that it's an affordable plan for the taxpayers of Union County. It's an affordable plan for the school system. It works going forward and doesn't financially negatively impact anyone in the county, so that we can keep on going forward. And I've said this repeatedly, even in our own deliberations with the board. One of the biggest challenges we had facing us with the capital planning pieces with the school system is there was not an ongoing source of capital funding made available. During the recession, during the big growth time, all that money spent on schools was debt or debt savings or one-time uses, which means at the end of the day, when you spend down your savings account or you run out of that credit card, then where are you? You're left paying the bill, and you also don't have a source to continue down for ongoing needs. So I think that, you know, that sustainability component is critical, because any successful plan that we put forward to the board, to either board, has got to include that component that it meets the ongoing piece. I mean, we could rush out and borrow $100 million, but at the end of the day, we only have $100 million to meet those needs. So fiscal sustainability is key. Transparency. I firmly believe that all the deliberation, and as we mentioned, when we were talking about our values, our ground rules, if you will, that transparency is critical in this process. I think it's our role, particularly as staff, as we work with volunteers in this committee and elected officials, that we need to share our information open and honestly. And we post a lot of things on our website, schools post a lot of things on their website. So we just need to be sure we keep that in mind as we go forward. The deliberations, all the information, you can go back and track history in different places and see kind of what the deliberations were. We put all the video up on our website from these meetings. Well, I'm sure we'll be up there. So I encourage us to kind of keep that in mind as we go forward. It's kind of pulling back the veil on government and kind of how it works, and exposing the residents, citizens, parents to that so that they understand how the decisions are made, how we get to where we are, the deliberations of this group. You know, we have 6 volunteers that are part of this, as well as, like I said, staff and elected officials. So kind of keep that in mind. Stewardship, we want to be sure that we're taking care of our resources and assets that we have. Responsiveness, and I think this is a really important one when we're talking about, whether we're talking about our water system or we're talking about our school system, creating a plan that's flexible enough to meet the changing needs, but rigid enough to plan around. And let that sink in for a second, because as we set out a financing structure and a financing plan, ultimately at the end of the day, the challenge we're going to have is there are needs, and I've met with Dr. Webb's team several times to talk about this exact issue, and things do change constantly. But we also need to be sure that while we have a responsive plan, that it's rigid enough that we can continue to plan. And we, throwing it out every year or starting over, not that that's what we've done, but rehashing it or restarting it every year becomes a lengthy effort. Whereas if we, for instance, in the county, we do a 6-year plan and we modify it as needed, but the core part of the 6-year plan is there. And then we work on the financing strategy around that. So I think that balancing that need for flexibility against the need for rigidness to be able to plan for planning and financing purposes is kind of critical as we go forward. Balance. And when we say balance, there's balance in the terms of debits and credits, and there's balance in service delivery. And then I think there's going to be balance in how we serve the students in the county. And this kind of gets back to what you were referring to, Mr. Dixon, is that at the end of the day, the county commissioners have to provide sheriff, law enforcement services, EMS, fire protection, social services, health services. The schools have to provide education, pre-K, 13th grade, those students to stay beyond even their years and all the different programs they provide. So what I'm suggesting is a successful plan provides for all of that, allows a balance in our approach such that we don't overweight our, I hesitate to call it a model, but our model of service delivery, our model of capital planning, we don't overweight it one way or the other such that we degrade any other service in light of another. Because all of those are important. Each of those services that we provide across the board, whether it's at the schools or at the county, have folks that rely on those. Whether it's social services, and then over 100,000 people that walk through that door every year to get those services. It needs to be balanced in our approach. And taking everything away from a single service and giving it to another leaves those folks that rely on that kind of left out of that process. So what I'm suggesting is a successful plan, or at the end of the day, our successful process or recommendation to the two boards would be that one that is balanced, fairly balanced between the two groups and between the service needs. And then achievable. And I think this is kind of the other key component. One of the things that we talk about a lot when we do our budget is, are you really going to do it in this year? Do you have the capacity to do it? Dr. Ellis pointed out that they can extend capacity for construction projects with different staffing and different ways to deliver projects, and that's absolutely probably true. So when we look at this, reserving funding, or what I would refer to in our budget process as valuable real estate, if you bump something out to put a project in, be sure that we can do that project in the time frame we've allotted. So for instance, if we're working on a 3-year plan, funding everything in the first year when we know that it can't be all constructed in the first year takes valuable funding from other things. Because every dollar and every piece in that plan is very specific and valuable. So at the end of the day, what we want to be sure we deliver back to the two boards is a plan that can be achieved by UCPS and can be funded by the county. So one that can actually be done in a time frame allotted and a time frame planned. Otherwise, if we, for instance, if we were to use tax rate to fund it, we've taken tax dollars that we didn't need to take at that point. We've set a rate such that for a project maybe that wasn't going to be done for the second or third year. So creating a plan that's balanced, achievable, responsive, and that demonstrates that good stewardship, taking care of the facilities that we have, and transparent and sustainable. If we hit those, what I would consider those 6 kind of key principles of the plan, they're kind of like ground rules, but they're not really ground rules because I think those govern our discussions. But these are, if we hit this checkbox at the end of the day, then I will say that we've had a successful process and a successful plan to put forward. So kind of keep that in mind. And I kind of put that, the way that the best way to kind of look at it is, these things build the frame around the discussion. Because I'm not talking about projects or any specific projects, and I'm not going to all get into specific projects, but it builds that frame through which we look to make that decision and to have that decision-making process. Okay, does that kind of make sense to everyone? And if you have a question, feel free to stop. Commissioner Hamilton.
One thing you might consider adding is communication. We're going to sit around the table tonight and we're going to talk, but if we only talk when we're around this table, I don't think we're going to accomplish much. I don't think there's a soul in here that is not a constituent of one of the county commissioners. So, and I encourage us to communicate. And I'm sitting on a committee right now that when we started out, there was a little apprehension, just like we have here tonight. It has, in 3 weeks, turned out you've got a group of friends talking openly, communicating, joking, and we are accomplishing the task. And I think we can achieve that here if we just communicate well, because what we'll find out is we probably have the same goal at heart. Just differences of opinions of how to get there, right? So I encourage the communication.
Can I, if you don't mind, you talked about key principles, and to go back a page, you said that you talked about the needs. So we're going to address the ongoing needs. Well, if you go forward to the page, I think needs need to be added to this, because that's what we're here to address, is the needs. So if you're going to develop a plan, you have to know the needs, and they have to be fiscally sustainable, transparency. I agree with all that, but I think we ought to add needs to that.
You were reading ahead, right? Because let's talk about the process, because I think that that's part and parcel of the process. As we kind of go through, and I think only this is what you're referring to, I would suggest to you that there's kind of 6 steps in a capital planning process. And these are kind of 6, I hate to call them milestones or benchmarks, but 6 things that you kind of need to accomplish. And they kind of need to go in order. They're not necessarily things you can do parallel to each other, but you kind of need to hit, cover the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth in that order to achieve. And if, some folks, I know our commissioners are probably familiar with this, you usually see it as a circular slide, because this is a process that's an annual process and you kind of work through. But I thought I'd spare you my graphics this time, because I do those quite a bit in other presentations. So the first thing I think is most important is getting exactly what you said, is assessment. Establishing existing and future capital needs. What are we talking about? Kind of getting to that, okay, here's the big pile of projects that we're going to have to work with. This comes back to the multiple plans, the studies that have been done, putting those together, and some of those are a little stale at this point probably. So even reassessment, and I know Dr. Webb and his team are always reassessing on an annual basis. So kind of coming back to, okay, ignoring the judgment, ignoring all those other pieces, what are all of the things and the needs that we really have to work with, and assessing what are the needs of the school system. And this includes, the new plan you have, construction equity plan, did I get it right?
The CC, community construction.
I knew there was an extra C, I just can't remember what it was. The equity plan that you're working through, all of that has to be baked together at the end of the day, because if we get to the end of the plan and come up with a recommendation, and then we go, oh, we forgot this piece over here, or this plan, then I don't think we've accomplished much, because now we're back to here's one bucket, here's another bucket approach. So I think this committee, going back to the charge, is to kind of work through that existing and ongoing capital needs. And to me, that's an all-encompassing statement for the school system. So kind of working with the total need through that assessment process and understanding what those are going to be. The next in that process then is establishing cost, current and future cost of projects. And sometimes this involves a cost-benefit analysis. I know when we assess a facility and looking about if we're going to replace a building or we're going to continue to maintain it, is that discussion, do you put $2.5 million in a building that maybe 13 to 15 to replace, and if that 2.5 buys you 10 years and your $13 million buys you 30? So, coming back through then to cost and looking at the costing and the benefit of a project, when is the right time to do that? Sometimes it's better to continue to maintain a facility or to patch it together because it's still serviceable, and it may not be time to replace it. And I'm not, I don't have any particular place in mind. What I'm just thinking is this is a process that I think we can use. And again, when we estimate current and future costs, that includes some decisions about when we do our long-term plan, do you inflate costs into the future based on, what the inflators are going on, accounting for cost increases? Do you not? Because there is a very valid argument for saying we're going to do it all in current dollars going forward. It's also looking at operating impact. If you open for instance, you open a new school, as you guys know, you've opened quite a few in the last 10 years, there's a significant operating impact to that. You're adding roof space, you're adding teachers, you're adding classroom space, internet, all those things that have to go into that. So looking at cost is an all-encompassing approach to knowing if we do X, the outcome will be Y. And deciding should we then do X based on the outcome. Or is there an alternative to achieving that? One of the things that we make our folks do in our capital process is you have to give me an alternative to your project. Now, it may not be a good alternative, it may not be one we'll choose, but think outside the box enough to give us an alternative to replacing the facility or to running the line, a water line down this avenue. Maybe it needs to be run down another street. It may cost more to do it, but there's always options to look at. So what I'm encouraging is, as we go through this, once we determine those needs, costing that out and looking at what the impacts are and what that's going to be over a long time is critical for the decision-making process. And then prioritization. As I said earlier, there's a limited pie. That's the reality. I think every commissioner on the county side would be happy for the county if there were, if we had $500 million to give to the schools to do projects, that'd be fine. But there's a limited pie. The taxpayers can only afford so much. So there has to be a process for what's the most important things and working down that list. And I think that there are some things that are less important than others. Not saying they're not important, but they're not the most critical thing at that time. And this is a process we go through when we do our budget even, in our zero-based budget process is we talk about, okay, here's what we would like to do, here are the things that we think are important, but at some point we have to draw the line and say we can't afford below this line. And the key to that will be then the prioritization. And I think we had some conversation go back and forth, and I know the schools kind of look at it a little differently, but when we talked about CIP, we look at building envelope. First secure the building, secure the roof, keep it dry, then move on from there. And that may not work, and I'm not suggesting what that is at this point. I'm suggesting the group comes up with a prioritization method. But I think you have to have some method for prioritization. Because we're going to have, again, this big pile of needs to the assessment process. We'll cost it out. Then we'll come back and say, okay, if we took this big pile, what's the most critical working down that big list? And there may be multiple pieces that are priority, but I think you have to kind of step back and say, these are priority because we can't do them all at one time. Did you have?
Well, I was going to say again, it's always a moving target. And, part of the problem, I think, in the past, and again, I want to move forward, but if you have something that happens to a roof and then something else that happens, et cetera, and so forth. So I think it's always moving, and I know Dr. Webb and his group, they're constantly reshuffling based upon events on the ground. Something happens to a building or we have a huge growth in one particular area, and so a school needs to be added on to, or whatever the case is. So I think that prioritization is probably a little harder to do in this big group in a static situation. I mean, I think you can give guidelines and suggestions and keep the lines of communication open, but realize that if if it's a stadium or an ADA or a roof, that may change at any given moment. And again, that goes back to the trust factor between the two groups to say, if it changes, it changes.
One thing that may help is that our CCEP, when we have it finished, it will have prioritization from the Board of Education. So that they will sift and winnow to bring to this group. So that may be a starting point for that.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with you, because I think that's when we talk about responsiveness.
Yeah, well,
We make a 6-year plan, but we only adopt 1 year at a time.
Yeah.
And that plan changes. And we recognize, I don't think anybody in the room would say, let's adopt a 6-year plan and say every year it has to be exactly what it was at the initial point. And I think even the general statutes, the way they're written and how the boards interact, actually contemplate that there is flexibility in that relationship, and that if there is an emergency, and I think we've even exercised that, I think it was last January with the additional roof funding, that the school board can come to the commission and say, we've had these emerging needs, we weren't aware of them, we need additional funding, or we need to move funding around. And I think the board, three folks on the board can make that decision and move it around. So I think there's an acceptance that there is changing needs. But again, a plan rigid enough to plan for, flexible enough to meet those changing needs is kind of what we're aiming at. So then once we know the prioritization, working through the funding strategy, establishing a multi-year strategy that's affordable and sustainable. But I kind of talked about this when we talked about fiscal sustainability, is going back to, once we have that plan and we know what the priorities are and we know what the projects are, then we can set out about determining how you fund them, because we'll talk about capital and what's the definition of capital in just a moment, but it matters as to what it is as to how we fund it. For instance, you wouldn't go take a 30-year note to buy a school bus or to buy a desk, but you will take a 25-year note or a 30-year note to build a school. And what you include in that and what you don't include in that and those kinds of things. So once we kind of have that prioritized list, then we can set out and say, okay, here's the list, and now here's kind of the framework for funding. We can start slotting projects into funding sources and then have an idea of how to move forward. Because I think the way we're going to get there is not all of one thing or all of another as far as funding sources. It's going to be a jigsaw puzzle, and the best financial plans have a lot of different components to them. They're not relying on a single source or a single piece, but are relying upon multiple sources and diversity in that portfolio. And I think that that's kind of the key. Once we know kind of what the projects are, what the cost is, what the priority is, then we can go about setting that financial plan into motion. And then implementation. And this, I'm going to be honest, this will be more on the school side than it will be the county side at the end of the day, is once that plan is adopted, how do you go forward in implementing it? Getting those projects on the ground, getting them built, getting them out the door. I get to be the lucky guy that signs off on the school's capital requests, reimbursement requests. So I see all the capital expenditures that the county pays for come across my desk and have to sign off on them. But I don't actually have to go out and build projects. Thankfully, I don't think Cindy would want me anywhere near building a project. But I can finance them like crazy. So going forward and implementing it in the most efficient, effective way possible is kind of the key. And then if you were envisioning this as a circle, we've kind of worked our way around. If it's a clock, we're kind of back around to 10 o'clock. And then the last step is then evaluation and reporting. And I really appreciate the reporting that Dr. Webb and his group are doing and what they're putting on their website and sending over to us related to their capital, because I think that's something that we've been lacking, whether it was out there we just weren't aware of it or we didn't go get it. But now being able to understand where the capital process is and what projects are working on, more so than just even seeing the checks go out from the bank account. And I think, I do want to publicly thank Dr. Webb and his group, because it's made it real easy for us to kind of follow and track. And our two staffs, I think, have worked really well, and Dan and his group, to try to get that reporting together. So evaluation and reporting, kind of, did we achieve what we were aiming to do? Kind of going back, did we hit these boxes? Did we put together a plan that hit those boxes? Did we achieve our plan as we laid it out? Does it have to be modified? Did the priority change? Did something happen that kind of kicked a project to the next year, which happens. We do a lot. Our biggest piece of our capital program on the county side is water and sewer. And if Ed were here, he'd tell you 100 reasons why priorities change every day. So we're familiar with that and we understand that. So it's kind of continuing to bridge that gap, close the loop on the communication, and continuing to report out to the public. Because the one thing that, particularly the 6 folks that are kind of volunteers, that you'll realize that everybody's watching this at home. And as we talk about these projects, we start to create this expectation that those projects are going to be done, and done at some point. Whether they high on the list, low on the list, just by virtue of discussing them, the public is going to say, oh, they talked about it, and they'll be talking about around, at the neighborhood meetings and all the different places. So that reporting feedback loop, explaining to the residents where we are, maybe that project didn't make the top of the list, maybe it's a 3-4 year out project, but at least we can say, it's in our plan, we appreciate that, that's a project of particular interest to you, but it didn't make, on the priority, we had these priorities in front of that. So just kind of continuing that.
Jeff, can I ask a quick question, or at least maybe request maybe some additional? On the assessment, the first one, establishing existing and future capital needs, that's one of the pieces, Jeff, of what this working group is supposed to be doing. Another piece is how in the world we're going to fund it. And I wonder if you'd be willing to add a second part to that, which would be, which would say establishing existing and future capital needs, and add to that and evaluate all possible funding options.
Well, I would propose that, excuse me, I would suggest to you that that's part of number 4.
Well, I understand, but if we could have at least looked at it as we're kind of balancing the needs, looking at the alternatives, then when we get down to number 4, we would have pretty much a good understanding of what funding strategy we want to employ, and really talk about focusing on that in number 4, where we're just exploring, and the assessment is an exploration. We'd explore the needs, but we could also explore the other funding options for us.
I'm happy to. The only caveat I would put to that is, and the reason why we don't do it in our process that way, and for instance, we don't tell our departments how much money is available at the start of the budget process, because what we want to know is what the real need is. And there's a risk, I think, when you put the funding sources next to the needs in the assessment process, that there's a risk of you may limit the request based on the funding sources available. And I think what we need to do is wrap our arms around the full need before we start to limit that need by funding sources.
The challenge may well be for us as we go to CCP, and we could talk more about this later, when we're going to be able to get that information. And if it's true that Mike's work and getting all the schools, coming up with a list of all the schools and what they need, and then getting them to prioritize, the facility committees to prioritize and whatever, by the time that gets to that, we could already be working on some of the alternative funding as well as we're working on the existing needs. I'm just trying to think of, we've got till June, and that would be.
And I would suggest you don't have till June. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So,
okay.
But I wholeheartedly, if that's the will of the board, again, this is just a suggested process. We can absolutely kind of work it into however the board.
If we could, I think that'd really be important to. And again, we won't be greedy with seeing the funding as well as determining our needs.
Sure.
But just for time's sake, in the process itself, it'd be great to be able to look at needs. Those are two things: needs and funding together.
Is the question just what funding avenues are available?
Yes.
I mean, that's what you're trying to get to.
The realism of what avenues are available.
And some of that will be fact dependent upon the type of need. Because I can tell you, you don't have 150 options. Your toolkit is about 4 or 5 pieces when it comes to funding sources. So, and it really then it'll be fact dependent upon what the item is. But we can put together a presentation on what the county's funding available, kind of how the county funds capital and how we determine that, and kind of what we see. We can absolutely work that in at that point in that process. I don't see a problem with that.
I think that'd be great.
If for our next meeting, I'm the teacher and I'm thinking about homework assignments, ours is going to be the CCEP to get that done, fast tracked. And I see the flip side of that is the homework assignment is because I don't know all funding options, but for us to be able to understand, and the public to be able to understand all the funding options. So I think each of us would have a homework assignment.
Then they could
Excuse
discuss,
that,
put the two together.
Yeah.
And we could have already right now established the work.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead, but I just begin with the end in mind, and we're all gonna have homework, and I.
Just signing
And I
homework
think,
already.
you know, and I think that'll work, and I think it's good as an educational process for the community as well, to kind of understand what what tools we have available to us and what the board has available to it, because our general statutes, there's legal ramifications, there's financial ramifications, so there is some, we can work through that and absolutely present back to this group kind of what those options
And I would just think the 6 of us that are residents, that are they're citizens, taxpayers, whatever you will call, that would be helpful to us to be able to get both those at the same time.
Well, and I think not only the members of this committee, but the general public's watching as well. I think it goes back to the tenet of transparency. I think full disclosure on how we pay for it and how we accomplish the needs. This is a good opportunity for us to educate ourselves if need be, as well as the general public.
And what can be used for what? I mean, what type of a bond we're using, where the money comes from, if it's coming out of a general fund, and what it can be used for. I think there's a lot of confusion in the general public's mind as to, well, we've got money in the bank, why can't you just use it for this? I know on our side that comes up a lot. You've got money in this account, why don't you use it for this, or why don't you use it for that? And it's like, well, GS, and just add numbers. So I think anytime we can do that, it'll help. Jeff, the other thing that I was looking at was 5 and 6. I agree with those. Like those, they need to be there. I think those at the end of the day, and y'all chime in, are going to end up being our 2 boards, not so much the working group. So as we get to implementation and evaluation, that's going to be the Board of County Commissioners and the Board of Education working together. At some point in time, our 6 fellow compatriots here are going to get relieved of their duties sometime on June or prior to June, and the boards are going to have to come back at this, and that's where I think the implementation, evaluation, reporting piece come in. So certainly have them there and on our suggested process, but just with an asterisk that those are going to fall back to the elected officials and staff to follow up on those.
And I completely agree with that, because keeping in mind, what I'm thinking here is just a capital process. So some will be done with this group, and again, at the end of the day, Dr. Webb and his team are going to actually have to go out and build the projects and do that work. So I agree wholeheartedly.
And Ms. Gooden, your team's gonna have to fund it.
That's right. So there'll be a lot of work done even when this group is done. So,
Congratulations, Susan. Oh, one quick thing, the cost, I don't know nothing about accounting. Cost benefit analysis. What is cost benefit analysis? Is that what you're talking about? Just the value?
right, determining, for instance, if you're at your house, okay, and you're looking at your refrigerator, and your refrigerator's kind of humming along, it's keeping all your food cold, but it doesn't provide ice and water in the door. You can look at it and say, it's going to cost me $1,000 to go buy a new refrigerator that does ice and water in the door, but is this one serviceable? Does it work? Does it keep my milk cold and from spoiling?
Gotcha.
Well, it might, and maybe then I don't want to replace it at that point, because you know what, that may be $1,000 I don't have to spend, or I may need, something new somewhere else in my house. My hot water heater may be out.
Gotcha.
So instead of going and buying a new refrigerator, I need to replace the hot water
Yes,
heater.
sir.
So that's kind of that, you sit down and you determine, okay, what's the cost versus the benefit, and does it make sense then to do that work? And sometimes it comes out that you do replace, and sometimes it comes out that you don't. But that's a process I think you exercise, especially when you're dealing with older buildings, is at what point do you stop doing roofs, or do you stop doing HVAC work, or stop taking out the asbestos and just tear it all down and put back a new school? And I think, we all know that there's going to have to be some of that at some point in the county, because we have old buildings. And that's just the reality of it. So determining what that cost benefit and when we slate that into the process is kind of what I'm talking about when we talk about that cost benefit. Does that kind of help?
That's helpful. I whispered to my banker next door. He wouldn't help me any with it.
Hey, is that a conflict of interest right there?
I want you to pick that person.
Landowners, we got.
I'm a recovering bank.
Okay, so moving along, because I think Mr. Yurchek said something that I think really kind of sparks this thought in my mind, and I think it's great because you gave me a lead into my next slide, is the schools do finance in the county one way, counties do it another. We have 2 separate parts of the general statutes we follow. Dan does his process, and I have my process, and They intermingle at certain points, but not a whole lot. They're not exactly the same. So what we do on the county side doesn't necessarily transpose over to the school side, and what the school side does doesn't necessarily transpose over to us. So when I talk about defining capital, what I'm really talking about is establishing a working language. You know, Cindy tells me, because I also manage IT sometimes during my day, and we have to translate. You have to get the IT stuff translated so the normal folks can understand it. And when you have an IT person in a room talking to a finance person, they might as well be, you know, one person may as well be speaking Chinese, the other one Spanish, because they're not going to come on the same page. So what I'm suggesting through this process, and I don't have a proposal for a definition or how we get there, but I'm suggesting is that we need to come to a working definition of when we say capital, what are we talking about? And I'll tell you, you know, for the consistency of the conversation, for the folks at home, I have the privilege of working with Commissioner Helms and about 15 other people, I think, on the EMS committee. And those are all televised as well, so if you're really bored one night, you're welcome to watch those on video. And we spent hours determining what we mean by response time. You know, VFDs see response time as one way, EMS sees response time as one way, I see it as another, Commissioner Helms saw it as something different. So coming to that working language, until you kind of agree on what you're talking about and how you define things, working that out is much more difficult. So what I'm suggesting is, as a group, whatever that definition is, we need to kind of come to that shared concept and kind of manage that expectation. Because again, the people at home probably have no concept of what we mean when we say capital. You know, capital means one thing for our purposes. Capital means something different if you're an accountant. And we're not talking about necessarily capitalization of assets. What we're talking about is what's a capital project, what falls into the capital definition. And I know, Dr. Ellis, I saw the slide at the very end of your presentation on this, so hope I don't step on what you're going to talk to too much. The county's capital improvement program management policy, a couple of years ago, I guess it's almost 3 years ago, 2 years ago, adopted a policy. And basically what this tells us is when we go to our capital plan, and we sit down to plan out what we're going to do over the next 6 years, there are some things we're going to include and some things we're not going to. Because this allows us then to parse out funding sources and say, okay, if it fits in the plan, then it meets the test to maybe be bond funded, or maybe use a short-term debt tool, or a lease purchase option, or something to that effect. So what we have said is, in our plan, the county's policy says costing at least $100,000 and having a useful life of 10 years. And this gets into asset life matching against debt. So you don't, for instance, go out and buy a bus that may have 10 years of life to it with a 20-year note, because once that bus is dead and gone, you're still paying for it. And then IT capital, costing at least $100,000 and having a useful life of 5 years. And we recognize IT, for instance, has a shorter shelf life. I know the schools went through a major IT program over the last few years and have invested heavily in that, but that all has a shelf life. You know, the servers, the software, the desktop computers, all that stuff's going to have a limited shelf life. And then other capital outlay not really fitting these two criteria come into the operating budget. And in the operating budget, then those are short-term capital acquisition, capital purchases. And you get into then, you know, down at the bottom I made the note, because I think one of the confusions in this policy is, this is our capital improvement program management policy. It's not our capitalization policy. The board formally adopted a couple of weeks ago, our fixed asset management policy, which lays out that anything over $5,000, which is I think the same level of threshold you have, gets capitalized. And that's an accounting thing. This isn't an accounting tool, this is a planning tool. This helps us to determine going forward into the future, how we're going to fund it, and where does it go in our plan. In addition to that, the general statutes have some very specific rules related to how you fund and how you account for capital, and this is particularly on our side, capital, and how you account for operating. Basically saying that if it goes into a capital project, that it's for the life of the project versus annually. If it goes in the operating budget at the end of the year, that operating budget expires. So when we start to parse out the pieces, we have to determine, is that project a multi-year project? And a lot of times what you'll see is, for instance, a $5 million water project that's going to take 3 years to build because you have engineering design, you know, you have to bid it out, you have to do the construction and so forth. So we don't want that project or that appropriation to expire after a single year. What we want it to have to do is to reach through the life of the project. I think building a school would be the same way. It's not something you do in 9 months, right?
No.
If you could, I would applaud you, because putting together that big building that quickly, but it's gonna be a multi-year process, so you wanna be sure your financing tools match kind of that process, so.
Can I just ask a question? Because
Absolutely.
I'm a layman when you're saying capital and capitalization and stuff like that. So you're not saying, because you have general statutes that you're required, the county is, the board has a separate set of general statutes. So you're not saying to deviate from either of those.
On a map.
You're saying, okay, I wanted to make sure I understood. But you're saying that you want something that's $100,000 to have a useful life of 10 years, that's your
For it to fall into our capital.
Funding.
Our capital funding structure and our capital planning. Otherwise, for instance, if it's, let's say you're buying furniture and you're buying bulk, you may budget $70,000 for furniture across all the county departments, for instance. We wouldn't put $70,000 of furniture in our capital program because A, it's not gonna take a multi-year to acquire that furniture, and B, that furniture doesn't really meet the financing threshold. We're not gonna go out and bond fund it. It's gonna be operating budget funds versus debt and those kinds of things. So this is kind of how we operate, how the schools operate is a little different. So I want to recognize that. And, I think Dr. Ellis's presentation lays this out into 6 different categories. We kind of look at it, and generally counties across the state look at it in 3 specific kind of big categories.
And Jeff, if I might just before you go. The intent is to really show the difference between how each of us operate from a capital perspective. But I think the objective is that as this group, we have to come to the same definition as to how we are going to define capital in order for us to do the task before us.
I don't know, I just think that we're at odds by our general statutes. I don't know that it's up to us. Am I wrong?
I think
I'm thinking the same
it
thing.
sets some minimum, but I think if we as a group can agree on a working definition.
I think I think that way when we have conversations, we're talking in the same general terms here at the table. And then once we decide on a course of action, then it goes back to the different boards and they gotta figure out how that fits in with their general statutes. I don't think it's incumbent upon us to have a working knowledge of the general statutes as a working group.
I fear, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
And I don't know, is it incumbent upon us to redefine what already is, I guess?
Yeah.
I'm confused. Because you say there's 2 separate ways of defining capital on the county side versus the school side. So that implies that the school side has already defined, based on general statute and everything, how capital needs are defined. So why are we commissioned with coming up with a new definition?
Well, I think the reason why it matters is, and I give you 2 options here because this is what the county does and this is kind of what the schools do. There's 100,000 different ways to define capital, and there's the general statute way which deals more with the specificity of the funding of it and kind of how you carry out that, and how Dan is the finance officer for the county, or for the school system, and I as the finance officer for the county, how we have to handle that as far as governing how we pay things out. What I'm suggesting is it's important for this group to come to an agreement on what that is, because when we start looking at finite pieces, there are going to be some things that we're going to look at and say, we don't really think that would be capital. And the schools are going to look at it and say, well, we think that would be capital. But in the school structure, it can be capital or it can be operating. It's not as definitive as saying it's all or nothing. So what I'm suggesting is, for the sake of cohesiveness as a group, working to a common definition. I'm not proposing that common definition. What I'm just showing you is compare and contrast. As a group, we can kind of come to that. Then that will kind of put away that conversation and say, if we've agreed on what that definition is, we know what this stuff we're dealing with is. Does that kind of help?
I'm going to defer to you.
Ladies first.
What I was going to say is, I think we're talking about it from 2 different ways. You're saying in this group, when we want to talk about capital and what we want to look at, we don't necessarily have to use the statutory definitions of capital, whether it's from the Board of Education or from the county. We just need to know what we're talking about here whatever we decide to do, they're gonna have to take it back and figure out how to make the statutes work.
Well, and I don't mean to be picky, but if you're gonna pick a dollar level, $100,000 or, you know, whatever, if that's what we're gonna do, our statutes read differently than yours. And I just think it's more about what the needs are and how to fund them. I don't know why you follow your statutes and we will follow, you know, the board follows theirs. I'm concerned as to why, I don't understand.
But for scope of what we're talking about, I think is what we're trying to agree on.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe you need to explain more about
Well,
what the difference is.
Let me give you an example,
actually.
because I think an example is the best way to kind of approach this. Host interface devices. They're about like $2,000, $2,500
I'm
each
sorry, I
for
didn't
each
know what
door.
you said.
Host interface devices.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Card
Okay,
readers at
okay,
doors.
okay,
I was gonna
I'm
say, you might wanna explain what that is. That's my first
They're
problem.
referred to as HIV.
HIV.
That's what I know.
But they're the security door. The security's on the door so that people with badges, just like we all have badges, can swipe and go in. An individual one costs $2,500, $3 grand.
$3,500.
Yeah. If we were doing one, we at the county would say, you know what, that's an operating expense. It doesn't take, you don't. It's a one-day project. You go out, you do it, or maybe a couple-day project, depending on how much work you have to do, and so forth. We wouldn't include that in our capital program. Now, if we were doing 100, that's a host interface device program that fits into our definition. So what I'm suggesting is having a common definition facilitates our communication at this level. I'm not saying it has to be one way or the other. What I'm suggesting is that if we all agree, and maybe we all agree to use the school's structure or some variant on that, because at the end of the day, we will have to figure out how to appropriate it and how to make it work legally. But I think coming to that definition of what we're going to talk about as far as what is included in capital, because you can include a lot of things in capital depending on how you define it. So, in answer to your question, I just think it's important to have a common definition.
I think you're right there and you're dancing around it. I don't think we use the school's definition 100%, but to develop a multi-year plan addressing the existing and ongoing capital needs of Union County schools. So I think it's incumbent upon this group, if this is the joint working group mission, that we use that as the base right there. And then at different points in times, you're going to interject with, well, the county would do this differently here, and then we'll know that we're at odds in a place here. We're all going to take a note, and at some point in time in a budgeting process, we know that that's going to be an area of where we may have some conflict that we're going to have to work through, hopefully prior to getting together and having a working session or working group together. But because of what the mission is, I think it's incumbent upon this group to use that really as the foundation, and then we just flag places where there's big differences. Is that reasonable for everybody?
That makes sense to me. My underlying question is, how different are they really? I mean, they obviously look different,
Well,
but can you get an example?
If I could do the schools, the piece on kind of.
Yeah, do an example
how the
of what
schools
is
work,
different.
At least how we understand it, and Dr. Ellis, feel free to chime in at any point. But kind of then when you look at schools, what's in their capital outlay fund, as far as, we define capital projects as capital projects. They work through the capital outlay fund. That's, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan. But what goes in that fund is laid out in general statutes. And it's really 6 different things for the purposes of, for the county folks to kind of slim it down a little bit and work through really 3 categories. The first one being category 1, which is acquisition of real property, construction, reconstruction, pretty much anything to do with the building. New roofing, new flooring, those kinds of things attached to the building. And why this is important is because, for instance, category 1 things, probably most days will be things you could bond fund. At some level, whether it's a 10-year note, 20-year note, if it's a full new building, if it's a full-on walls down renovation, or a new roof, depending upon how far you're going to go down that road. But category 1 capital, which I think is on your list, Dr. Ellis, 1 and 2, kind of go together. So it's really construction of new, renovation of old, and hard renovation. The second category then is acquisition or replacement of furnishings and equipment. And this is probably, I'll be real honest, one of the biggest sticking points between the county and the school system is because these are things we would normally not include in our capital program. These are, you know, computers, or some computers, lab equipment. I think the statute actually says textbooks, if I remember right. It's been a while since I looked at the specific statute. But category 2 things, if you turn over the building, these are a lot of things that fall out versus being hard attached to the building. And then category 3 are school buses, activity buses, and other motor vehicles. And you know, those have varying lifespan. So really, these are the 2 different ways you can look at it. We as a committee can decide, you know, we want to use this frame, which is fine, or we want to use a blend of the 2. But I think it's important that at the end of the day, we all agree that when we say capital, what are we talking about? Because when we say capital, we mean this. And when Dr. Ellis talks about capital, this is what she's referring to. Oh, sorry, I went too far.
And
That's what she's
may I
referring to.
add that under the statute, I don't see as we have a whole lot of option because it says the capital outlay fund shall include appropriations for. So it's not like we've picked and chosen, it says shall, and that's.
I think that raises a question for me, if you don't mind. Jeff, you said that, you know, because the school does it one way, but the county does it another. Is that because of the statutory requirement that they look at capital the way they look at it versus the county looking at it the way the county does?
The general statutes lay out for the schools that they're going to have a certain number of funds. I believe it's like 9 funds. That fund 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way through, and there's local funding, local current expense funds, state funding, federal funding, your special revenue funds, which would include child nutrition and after-school funding, your trust accounts, your trust funds, and those. And correct me if I miss any of them, Dan, but you have the capital fund, and then you have your special revenues fund, I think is what it's referred to, which is those things which are specific to the school system for specific purpose, like grants and other things. When I say there's some flexibility in how you account for it, I think what it is that in the operating fund, for instance, in the school's current expense fund, if they want to purchase a desk, you can purchase a desk out of the school's operating or school's current expense fund. Now you may not go out and replace the entire schools with a furniture out of that operating fund, but those things which are smaller items, smaller capitalizable items, you can acquire out of that fund. It doesn't have to be that you only buy desks out of the capital fund. So I think there's a little bit of flexibility there, and it does, in general statutes, we're not required to, as the county, to have all those different funds. We have, you know, there's the generally accepted practice of the limited number of funds rule, which means you don't want to have too many funds, but we have capital funds and we have operating funds, and sometimes, you know, they're a little different, but that's what, you know, the schools do have a defined set of funds they have to work in, and the general statutes do specify what can go in those funds as far as what's required.
Can I try to make this simple? I think I'm going to try to make it simple. You're basically saying in category 1, 2, and 3, there are different ways, different funding methods that you would use based upon those 3 different categories, right? Bonds, whatever, which is fine. But on the school side, all of that stuff is capital. I assume whether it's bought by 1 book or 1,000 books. And the general statute says that whether we buy 1 book or 1,000 books, it obviously you'll buy 1,000 and not 1. That for the purposes of this group is that we'll decide that books are important. How they get labeled, how they get paid for, that's, you know, you all talking about the funding and us talking about the priorities. I think if we get too much into because we're set up differently by general stat, you know, separate but equal boards or however it is, you get too much into trying to get everybody on the same page when we really are when we're talking about funding and agreeing on the priorities and agreeing on the funding. So I would.
Let me just add on to what you're saying, because it's kind of what I was thinking. Are you worried that we would just go by one thing for the door? Because I don't think that's what we're here to talk about. And we can definitely agree to that as a group and say, you know, we're not looking at things that cost $1,000, even though we know for accounting purposes, the BOE is going to call it a capital outlay.
And I think that's kind of what I think the goal is, if we come to a working definition as a group, that's kind of what we're aiming at, is that we we don't major on the minors. We really spend our time working on the substantive pieces, and recognizing that we get to that common definition. And I'm not suggesting that our way is right or that either way is better than the other. I'm just suggesting we just need to agree on it.
Well, I'm just fairly sure that I sit on 2 site-based committees that are at schools that are helping with this CCEP process, and I don't think you'll end up with a list of 5 textbooks and 3 math books and an eraser and things. I mean, I think that there'll be substantive capital needs going out for a period of years, so we might be splitting hairs.
It might be more
over
of a
this
academic
just
thing.
rather than saying, these are the needs, and if you need to fund it differently.
Because this group should be more big picture, is what we're saying.
That's kind of what I was thinking, but maybe I'm
what I'm
making it
hearing,
too simple.
then if I could, what I'm hearing is we want to work through our definition, and we're aiming at the bigger things, not the small items. Is that kind of?
I'm comfortable.
Is that
with
what I'm
that.
hearing from everyone?
In our industry, we refer to the process that we're doing here as the scope of the project. And all the trades involved agree to the scope. Now, as to the means and methods, one trade may be different from another. So I think scope is what we're after here. Means and methods will fall in place as we move forward. But I don't think we need to get so far down in the weeds that we
I
lose the big
agree.
picture.
Well said.
Because if it's a building, it's a building. If it's a wing, it's a wing. If it's a bus, it's a bus. If it's textbooks, it's textbooks. It's not.
Kind of.
Well,
And Jennifer-
I know, and you're a finance guy and I'm not,
And even on the school side, it's a little different, but I think that Mr. Stewart's exactly right. I think what we're talking about is just trying to be sure we have an agreed scope, is all.
Yeah, and
Bigger scope, big picture.
yeah.
And the $100,000 is a pretty small scope. When you really think about $100,000 compared
Across the
to
school
Unfortunately, in some of
what
the
we talk about is capital.
I want to make sure we talk about buses here, because right now buses, I think, are $84,444 apiece today.
So there are really big things that fall under 100,000.
So there are really big things for us that fall under. This past year, we asked for 1 bus. We may ask for a half dozen next year. We have to look at mileage to see where they are. I know we're getting ready to do a big activity bus refurbish, because now they're coming under some of the same auspices as our yellow buses. So I don't want to say the $100,000 is a good number for us, because buses are a really big thing for us. And we use them for a number of years, especially since the legislature has upped the mileage from $200,000 to replacement to $250,000 for replacement this past session.
I think the dollar amount is the stumbling
Well,
block, maybe.
I was going to ask 2 questions that I hesitate asking is, where do we fall into a disagreement or confusion, which is, I think, what you're at. We're looking at big things, and I think Dr. Ellis just sort of answered that. I would think that the school system would buy multiple buses when they replace buses, but you say some years you just need 1.
This
So-
past year, we only needed 1. I can assure you that that number is multiplying as we're looking at our mileage for next year, based on what the state standards are. So, we're going to be well over the $100,000 threshold this upcoming year, but we were not this past year. But a bus is a big ticket item for us.
But it's a big ticket item. It
Same
lasts
thing
for
as,
several
right,
years.
and same
Yeah.
thing as a chiller. Chiller can come in under $100,000, but yet it's something we're gonna put in school. What are we looking at, 86, 87,000?
It could be in industry. So what we try to do is bulk purchase when we can.
Exactly.
But when it's still a capitalizable piece of equipment, or whatever it may be, if it's not over that 100,000 threshold, then it's still by our statute, we have to capitalize it.
So then, now we're talking about capitalizing assets versus what a capital asset is, and that's, sorry, I'm a finance nerd.
Well, I just think it's what the capital asset, I mean, that's what we have to go by.
Well, the general statutes don't
Is that-
define a capital asset.
Is that where part of the confusion is?
I think one of the challenges we've had, and the reason why we wanted to have this conversation is because this has been a point where we do not, as the county and the schools, have a working common definition to be able to discuss the issue. And again, coming at this and saying, here's the 2 ways that it's presented, we just need to agree on a way to talk about it, because this is come to the first things we can agree on and work from their approach, that until we can come to that agreement on what we're really working through, then I think we can't move on to the rest of the task.
Well, okay, I guess where I'm stuck is, I mean, I'm seeing all sides here, so I'm kind of at one point asking what the question is. But if the school system, which is what we're here for, we're talking about the system, not just Parkwood or, you know, West Union or whatever, we're talking about the system. If the system needs HO, is that a capital item?
I would say so.
If the
Yeah,
system
children.
needs 3 textbooks for the library because they've been destroyed or replaced, is that OpEx or is that CapEx?
And I would call it operating. But I think you get, when you look at that list and the
But
definitive
but
list.
regardless,
Go ahead.
That's how we account for it, you know?
Yeah.
We're just talking
We
about the
don't have to
funding of
talk
the
about
needs.
it
It's
here.
really the funding of the needs.
It's the funding of
Yeah.
but I think to everybody's point, that's what we need to understand. We need to understand when we talk about a capital item, that that's what we're talking about.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we have needs that have a useful life of 10 years, needs that have a useful life of 5 years, and take out the figure, the cost.
I think that would fix it.
yeah, because we're only gonna be talking about big items here. We're not gonna talk about
Yeah,
3 or
just talking
4
about the useful
textbooks.
life.
That's not what we're here for.
And categories on that one.
I think that's a very good suggestion.
I mean, understanding that textbooks could have a useful life of 1 year, but it's still a need. And it's
But we're
still
not gonna
falls,
look at 3
it's
or
still,
4, we're gonna look at.
yeah, but my point is that it still falls under the statutes of what.
Of what they are gonna request, but we're not in that point, we're not.
No, and I just wanna make sure.
Let me restore order here a minute, Mayor.
May I
What do you have to
say,
say here?
we're not gonna capitalize a single textbook. We're not gonna capitalize textbooks unless we're building a new school and we need to buy enough new enough new textbooks for an entire school. So let's take textbooks off the table, because I'm sitting there getting real uncomfortable about us talking about
And that's
capitalizing
my fault. I
textbooks.
probably wasn't the best example, so I apologize.
No, that's okay, that's fine, but to lay everybody's mind at ease, that is not something unless we, and I opened a new school, and, you know, when you have to buy for 1,200 children, and it's going to last now, the sad part of that is our textbooks have had to last for umpteen years times because of the recent funding from the state, so let's put that one to bed if we can.
So the suggestion, if I can recap, is useful life of 10 years for needs and useful life of 5 years. We're going to categorize them from that point, but if it's less than 5 years, then we're probably not going to address it as this committee. Is that a fair assessment?
Can I see?
Motion's been made and second's been approved.
What's the definition again?
If it lasts more than 10 years,
Greater than 10 years.
greater than 10, 5 or less, and we're just gonna, we're just gonna leave it at that for right now. We're not gonna put a dollar figure around it.
Right. 5 or less won't come before the committee, but it has to, essentially, anything over the 5.
Anything over 5.
Anything over 5.
Yeah, there you go.
Over useful life.
That's great.
That we'll bring in here, because it's probably capital, and we can get 5 years out of it. Something we're gonna capitalize on our financial record.
And something that's a big picture item, not 3 textbooks, like you say.
Well, and I think what Mr. Yates is getting at, like I say, we come to common terminology that we might better budget our needs. If it's something you're gonna look at as something you're not gonna issue bond debt for, we would be prone to put it in a continuing operating type situation. When we approach you, that'll take some of the kinks out as far as you understanding what our needs are and we understanding how you're gonna fund it, so. And I mean, I think that's, like I say, we just need to develop that common scope. The means and methods, we'll have to deal with individually, but I think the common scope is what you're talking about.
Perfect.
Check.
Move on.
I applaud you for doing that, because I know this has been an issue that's been talked about between the schools and the county
For years.
for years, so.
It precedes me, precedes you, it's, yes, for a very long.
So, if I could indulge for just 2 more slides, and I'll be done, and we can move on to the rest of the agenda. Kind of benchmarks in the process. It's important to know because, you know, the local bill, or the session law now, refers to the June 30 deadline. Realistically, however, from both the school board side of the house and the county side of the house, that June 30 deadline isn't going to work. And here's why. Let me kind of walk through kind of how the process works from general statutes. All these are out of the general statutes. So these aren't just deadlines that I created, these are kind of laid out in GS 159, and I believe the schools is 115C. Is that right?
Yes.
So we had August 1st, we can check that block, that's everybody got appointed. May 15th, 2015 is the first date that the two boards really in the process have to interact from the perspective of the school board has to submit to the Board of County Commissioners their budget request for consideration. And I did put it on here, there's actually one more date ahead of that where the superintendent has to submit her proposal to the school board. So that's the first real touch point the two boards have in the budget process that's legally defined. They can have as many as they want, and the general statutes actually suggest they should have more. But from a statutory perspective, that's the deadline that's hard and fast that is supposed to be when that first discussion of what the school's funding request is going to be. Then by June 1, the county manager has to provide to the board of county commissioners her recommendation as far as how to fund the county services. That recommendation has to include how to fund the schools needs as well, not just the county portion. And we used a different process this last year, and I think we'll be using it again next year to consider that, but it still boils down to on June 1, there's a final recommendation from the county manager for the board's final consideration. Then by June 30, under the local bill, or the session law now, you have that June 30 deadline, the group is supposed to report back. But also on June 30, the Board of County Commissioners have to adopt no later than June 30. Usually we like it to happen a little bit ahead of June 30 because we have to implement it for July 1. The budget, operating and capital, and establish the tax rate.
Well, if we submit it in the morning, y'all have plenty of time to get it done by the evening, don't you?
Not.
Sure.
So to give you an idea, we're kicking our budget process. Probably, we're already working on it in our office, and we've been working on it since August. We'll open it up for departments to start our discussions in 2 weeks, by the second week of November. And it takes, thousands and thousands of lines, and I've seen a download of Dan's GL. It's thousands and thousands of lines on his side as well, of kind of how that all works together. But what I'm suggesting to you is that if it's submitted on June 30, the first time that it's really going to have, or really have the ability to address it, isn't going to be 2015. It's going to be that 2016 cycle, because the board has to come out with that tax rate by July 1, on the June 30 date. And I just put on there the first opportunity then, if we determine as a group we want to recommend a bond election of some kind, the first opportunity for that election is only general elections in even numbered years. So you have May and November of 2016, and your next opportunity doesn't come until 2018. So,
let me ask a question about that, because, why, explain that to me, I missed something somewhere. Why are we in even numbered years on bond elections? Because we've done off-cycle bond.
They changed the law, and I'd have to this is when Jeff Brook would usually be very helpful, but it changed a few years ago, and I think it's an attempt to keep the cost of the election down, because I think, as we saw, a countywide runoff election that we had here.
Is this a
July.
county change or
This is a
state?
general statute.
Yeah,
State law.
okay, because I missed that, I didn't see that.
This is not our rule. This is the general statute.
That's why I'm.
Requires that it's only during those even number of years when there's the way they frame it, I call it a general election, a county-wide election. So the polls are going to be open. Right. And so generally what you will see is that falls in line with when you have a commissioner election. Because the commissioner elections are county-wide typically. They happen in those even numbered years. You have one in May for the primary, and you have the one in November. Then your next opportunity isn't again until that 18, and then 20, and so forth. The other realistic issue is that it takes about, in my estimation, I haven't done one here in North Carolina, but having talked to our bond counsel and all the folks on the legal side of it that get involved, it's not something you put together in 90 days. It's something that takes months to put together and get it, how you advertise it and allow the campaigning for it and the PACs to do their thing and, get the information out to the residents. So, it seems silly to say May 2016 is right around the corner when it relates to this issue. And we're going to be right up on it. So realistically, kind of going back to how the calendar has to work, if we don't finish our work until mid-June, we more than likely have missed the boat or put a real pinch on the decision makers in that process. Because even from this board, remember, this is a recommendation going all the way back to the full circle. It's a recommendation to both boards. And at that point in June, the Board of Education's already made their recommendation or request to the county. Not that you can't, we couldn't allow that to come in, but realistically, that planning process is way down the road from a funding and financing perspective and setting tax rates. At that point, we'll have really set the county side of the ledger, and what will be being discussed is the school side of the ledger. So, I just wanted to put this up there because functionally, although the session law requires that that it be done by June 30, functionally June 30 is not a realistic expectation if we want the plan to be put into play for 2015 or 2016. 2015. Sorry. So kind of just keep that in mind going forward. So as Dr. Ellis so happily pointed out, I think we have some homework if the board, as a group that we may want to consider. Determination of the process, any assessments if needed for the next meeting, kind of how we go forward from there. Establish that working definition, and we had that discussion so we can check that box off at this point. And then establish that calendar and benchmarks. Because I think establishing the calendar and creating what the expectation is and kind of how we're going to flow through this process is important. Otherwise, I think we're setting ourselves up to fail if we don't recognize that we do have constraints, and outside of this group, calendar constraints to make it work. So with that, I'm done.
Well, based on the previous slide, slide 8, page 8, can we back into when we need to have a recommendation based on the dates
We
to
would say
implement at a certain?
March, April.
Yeah. I mean, ideally for us to be able to put it together, and keeping in mind too, the other thing that's going to happen this year is the reval.
Is the what?
The revaluation.
A reevaluation.
Okay, and John Petoskey's done some good presentations on that, so I won't belabor the point on what happens with that. But suffice it to say, that's a major impact on that process as well. So what we have is a lot of balls up in the air at that point, and when we add something late into that process, it just makes that process near impossible to complete and bring back to the commission or even the school board and the public a plan they can go forward with.
Is this feasible then to even do by 2015?
I'm sorry, what you
Is it
said.
feasible to try to get this done by 2015?
May I comment on that? We're hard at work on this CCEP right now, and we're even going to try to fast track it forward to have our board vote on it, and I haven't even talked with the full board about it, but it's the staff's hope to have the full board to vote on it at the March meeting. Now that would mean this group would have to commit to probably weekly meetings the month of March. And you're right, they're balls, but they're crystal balls, and any one shatters, and part of it is irreparable. So we've got to make sure that our schools and the parents and the stakeholders have had their voice, and what we hope to bring to the board and then bring to this group will be all the CFS, and I need to do our presentation because this is getting into it, all of those previous plans, all of it solidified into the CCEP. So we won't be talking about 6 plans that was been presented in 4 years. You'll have one plan in front of you that sort of codifies from what we're, since 2008 on up to what we see right on through. Does that make any sense? And do I think we can do it? I think the absolute very best we can do is to get it to you at the March meeting. And I'm going out on a limb because I haven't even discussed that with the board, but we've talked about it with staff about what we're going to have to do, because the last thing we want to do is double count and double send something to this group.
And you got 53 different folks putting together 53 different
and the
site-based team.
and departments, and the facilities committee is going to have to winnow out the wants from the needs.
That's right, to get to what Mr. Dixon asked.
To get to what, and that is our hope, that that the finance facilities committee can shake that out and winnow it out. So if all the group is committed to meeting heavily, I would say March. I do see it as doable, and I'm 1/14 of this group, but I do see that as very doable.
Is that March 1st?
whatever, I don't know the date for the March board.
No, the reason I say is because Jeff and I had conversations yesterday that, yeah, end of March, but we could deal with the end of April, worst case.
To have, the likelihood of success and the viability of a funding plan is directly proportional to the time we have to work with it. So, if I get it and we work through it, the earlier on we get it, then I'm telling you, you'll have more options as a board, as you as a board of county commissioners will have more options to move forward. The later we do, we begin to become more limited in our options because other things start to solidify around it.
First Tuesday in March, whatever that date is, will do our dead level best. I can say that.
Fair enough.
Okay.
I'm looking at board members.
Jeff, let me just tell you,
Staff will do our dead level best to get it to you then.
folks, since we're kind of moving around in different directions, and I know we want to give our side a chance to talk. The determination of the process, any assignments, we've already got our 2 assignments. Just to reiterate what we've already said, one being that the school side will continue to work on the CCEP and even step it up a bit. And then the other thing would be to evaluate potential funding options, that y'all would be willing to work on that for our next meeting. Those would be the 2 things. Now, if you want to add discussion about the bond, we could make that a third.
I think that'll be one of your funding options.
Okay, well, let's just let that be one of our funding options. How does that sound to everybody?
That's good. Could you just clarify that acronym, CBC?
Community Construction Equity Plan.
I would never guess that.
It's a little like being in the military. There's acronyms everywhere.
Did you get help there, Amy?
Community construction.
Equity Plan.
Okay.
And we worked, number 2, we worked on the capital, working definition of capital. Seems that we've done some good work with that, Jeff, thanks to your presentation. And the calendar benchmarks we talked about in that, Mary, you have said the first Tuesday in March.
March 7th. That is if the facilities committee will work like the Dickens to, in February to get that done, and I will do my best to deliver that.
Okay, and you report back to us
Yes.
the viability of that option.
At the next meeting, I will be able to report the viability I have.
I would suggest, if I may, that we would take a 5 or 10 minute break because we're coming up on 2 hours. And I know my board.
Some of us that are over 55. You're not over 55, I know. Just 50. You playing golf yet?
I'm very good.
Yeah, right over here.
Yes, never? Just meant me like literally 30 seconds.
Her professional background lends itself perfectly
to the board.
No?
Okay, unless you really take it away.
Okay, I understand the Panthers are playing, and we will do our dead level best, but we need to give this the attention which it deserves. And I think, I need to say before we start, and I'm not sure if I can work, where am I? It's not there.
Left and right.
Oh, left and right, I'll put this up and down, excuse me. Okay, we want to talk about where we've been and then where we've headed. And let me say up front, the J word or the L word will not be in it anymore, but it is tonight, so everybody just understand that. We want to talk about the history of our capital needs, the notice that we've given, the funding that, for whatever reason, has gotten us behind with roofing and other things. We will not talk about the L word, the creation of the working group, and then the task of developing a multi-year plan to address our needs. Did I go too, I went too far, I'm sorry. Okay, click happened.
Well, I think it's important for us to go back, and like I'm an old science teacher, so we've got to go back and touch the first base. Take a look at what we submitted over the years, the needs of Union County Public Schools, to the county commissioners and through a variety of different methods. If we look back in 2008 and 9, the comprehensive facility study, as Mr. Dixon stated, by Yates, Kreisberg, and Hughes was conducted. It was a very thorough, in-depth look at our facilities at that time. 2009, UCPS presented a capital improvement plan, our CIPs, we refer to it, and like, you know, I heard mentioned about banks have acronyms. Well, we in education, we have our acronyms. 2010, the comprehensive facilities study was vetted. That was around $283 million approximately. It was vetted down. It was screened and sifted by the facilities committee to weed out the wants to establish the needs of Union County Public Schools at that time. And that turned out, was referred to as the CFP. In 2010, we submitted our capital improvement plan as per budget by to the Board of County Commissioners. 2011, we conducted the Public Schools Facilities Needs Survey. We do that it's required 10 years, and we update it every 5 years. 2013, the Board of Education approves a new 6-year CIP requested by the Board of County Commissioners. And in 2013, the jury verdict of $86,184,000 addressed our capital outlay needs. And in 2014, the Board of Education budget request was submitted as well. When you looked at the comprehensive facilities study,
We are having a problem with the video feed.
okay.
If you'll give me just a minute,
Oh,
so we
okay.
can get it started back.
Well, no, you know, the Panther game people like Randy, I'm trying.
We appreciate
that.
DVR.
Hey, Randy, if you got Verizon, you got it on your phone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, look at his phone.
I don't get it. I bought a gun from Sony, I got a phone.
Policy, don't stay home. If that's the case.
It don't matter if Randy gets it.
Every break, Panther has on. They just recovered.
Really? Yeah.
Dr. Rabbit, I think we may have it,
Ms.
so.
West, are you ready?
Yeah, let's try.
Okay. If we look at the comprehensive facility study, as I shared with you, that resulted in about projects that totaled approximately $283 million. It was really commissioned by Union County Public Schools, funded by the Board of County Commissioners, to look at, survey, and document the needs of the facilities that existed at that time. As I shared with you, that contract was awarded to Yates, Kreisberg, and Hughes, the architect firm, in September of 2008. And the fee for that was $400,000. It surveyed at that time 51 school facilities. As you know now, we have more facilities than that. The CFS completed September 16, 2009, and again, it identified approximately $283 million worth of wants and needs. As you can see, it was very thorough. You can see the seals there from whether that's the mechanical, or the electrical engineers, and as well as the architect firms. You can go online and you can look at that CFS. It breaks the down by the cluster, and you can mine that data from cluster to individual school. It lays it just as you guys, you can see that list of projects that have been identified, and then they're laid over and laid out by years in which they would hope to be completed and funded and completed. If you look at the total of that project, that's that summary sheet there of the $283 million.
Have any of those been accomplished?
We've worked on, when it moved to the CFP, Commissioner Helms, we have done some of those on the CFP, that is correct. And you would see that listed on the webpage, the projects that we have completed.
And what we can do, we can send everybody in this working group the website links so you'd have it at your disposal and you wouldn't have to search for it if that would be helpful.
Great.
We can accomplish that, I would hope, tomorrow, if we can make a note, please.
As you, again, identified through that CIP, through 2013-14 needs, the CFP identified $90 million, as well as $26.7 million of ongoing maintenance capital outlay projects, submitted at $116.7 million, is what that totals up to. And that was submitted to with the Board of Education's 2009-10 budget request to the Board of County Commissioners in May of 2009. As you can see, we did prioritize that list for our needs, and it's prioritized. When you go online, you will see it year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. We didn't put a 2009, 2010 on there because we didn't know when it would be funded. So they're still there. 2010 Capital Improvement Plan identified the following capital needs through 2013-14. $70 million in the Comprehensive Facilities Program, $32.4 million ongoing maintenance capital outlay. The total then existing for the 2010 building needs were $102.4 million. Submitted with the Board of Education's 2010-11 budget to the County Commissioners. As I shared with you earlier, we, by General Statute 115C-521A, we have to complete our 10-year survey, year 0 to 5, which was 2010-11 through 15-16. As you look through there, it shows about $110 million worth of needs, $40 million and some change in additions, $66 million in change in renovations, and furniture and equipment was almost $4 million for that $110 million. Years 6 through 10, through that survey, identified almost $60 million in additions, almost $99 million in renovations, and right at a little more than $5 million in furniture and equipment. So that survey shows $274,035,176 worth of needs.
Now, I think it's important to note that does not include new school construction, okay? That was not inclusive of new schools.
Nor the purchase of land. It is not new school construction, nor the purchase of land. May 7, 2013, the Board of Education approves its 6-year capital improvement plan, again referred to as our CIP, as requested by the Board of County Commissioners. And the fiscal year 2014 through 2019, that totaled $214,398,208.
And that one does include, I believe, at that point in time, it included a new elementary and a new middle school for that point in time, if I remember correctly.
That is correct.
Okay, let me take over here on this one. This $86 million, just let me talk about it a little bit. These are existing capital outlay needs that we have submitted, and they are in the format that the county's requested, and they've gone to the county as existing needs, and I'll just say that about that slide. Additional, and I need to be very upfront and honest with the additional money that the Board of Education has received. In October of 21, we received an additional approximately $5.3 million On March 4th, the two boards entered into agreement for emergency roofing, which has been a godsend to the children of Union County Public Schools. And by agreement between the two boards that we recognize this is going towards the needs that have already been identified. I'll put it that way because I won't talk about the J word. Okay, when we get to the 14-15 budget request, we've requested 97.7 million in capital, and that was already the previously identified 86 million, but now you've got to say 86 minus 14.9, and that's the emergency roofing and the 5.3. I want to make sure I clarify that has already been received and is being put to use. Technology needs of 377,000, emerging needs of approximately 23.4 million, preventive maintenance at 2.5 million, and there's that one bus this year at $84,000 that will be more coming up.
Dr. Olson.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, excuse me.
Two questions. Is the bus a capital? Never mind.
We will use it more than 5 years. How about I answer that one?
What are emerging needs?
Mike, I'll let you answer that.
Those are the issues and repairs that have emerged since the comprehensive facility study or the CFP.
Okay.
Whoops, I think I did. The recognition of our capital needs. In 2009, I believe it was Al Green who was the county manager. We delivered 3 copies of the CFS for him, the finance officer at that time, and the BOCC chairperson, and I believe that was Ms. Kim Rogers, I think. And there's the letter of transmittal identifying that we sent it. And let me see if I can get my notes. The counties that prepared the tax-supported CIP and financial feasibility from 2010 through 2014. And at that time, the county manager recommended to fund the Board of Education's CFP at $10 million the first year, that's 2010, $14 million for the next 4 years, for a total of $66 million through 14, and then to make it $80 million through fiscal year 15. And this funding is is on the county's website, and we took a snapshot of the website. I think it was this morning. Yep, there it is, and you can go even closer and see that it. You can see the funding line of 14 times 4 equals 66 plus 14 to get to your 80 million. And then in January of 2011. Mr. Simpson was the chairman, Mr. Jerry Simpson was the chair of this Board of County Commissioners, and the county manager, Ms. Cotto, signed the school system's facility needs survey, certifying that they'd received and reviewed the survey, and it identified 110,000 in needs for years 0 through 5 through 15, 163 million through 610, that's through fiscal year 2020. And it included specific references and links to these other 2 documents that we will again send to this working group, so everybody will have every copy of it.
Yeah, I wish
What
it
did I
was
say,
110,000.
I'm wanting to see the Panthers, Randy. We can stop this group. I'm sorry, excuse me. And there's where the signatory, all of the folks who signed off on it. And then we'll go through and this becomes very heartening. I will say this when we get to, this is Mr. Yates, January 21 of this year, presentation to the Board of County Commissioners, building a fiscally sustainable, and I'm highlighting that word because that's what we're after, is sustainability, future. And in this presentation, and Mr. Yates, you probably know a whole lot more about this than I do, that for fiscal year 2015, at that point in time in January, you had recommended 22 million. I think we ended up with the 19.5, but you had started out with 22 million. And I think it's important to note that in January, you were thinking that the school system would receive right at $104 million. It was 103.9.
Well, just one point of clarification. This was annualizing, like we said we would, Dr. Webb's submission from the previous year. It was part of our financial projection based on that document that you referenced there is our modeling that we do with the general fund. So this was part of a scenario analysis we did with the Board of County Commissioners to talk about funding feasibility going into the future and what would need to occur to be able to fund that. So this was included in our model. And I I wouldn't want to characterize this as a recommendation as much as it is a plug into the model as a projection to show what if happens to the general fund on the county side if we plug these numbers in. Because this is a projection, a 5-year financial projection based on certain criteria and assumptions. So this isn't the recommended budget or a recommendation, it was a snapshot in time.
Fair.
So I just want to be.
That's fair. That's very fair. Then we'll fast forward to, I don't know where this little thing right here, the public hearing on June 2nd, 2014, the proposed fiscal year 2015 operating and capital budget. And we'll go to the proposed on that date in June for Union County Public Schools. And I want to note that the 17.9 right here under the 2014 revised is what we actually received. It came in increments of 3 million, then 5.3, and then 9.5. And we're very grateful for that 17.9 to begin working on our facilities side. Very grateful. Then I think it's important to note that on that same day, June 2nd, it was also proposed the 19.531, and then the 2016 projection, 19.7, and the 2015 projection is $2 off of what is in the session law, and the 2016 is exactly what is in the session law. And so we're very grateful for those numbers all the way down in the yellow for a total of $139 million, a little over dollars. And I note that the funding was for capitals to be provided based on prioritized project list, and I think we have historically given the Board of County Commissioners a prioritized list. Now, I think at one point in time in a little arguing session, somebody might have said everything was first priority, but that we have, that we will go back and, well, let's just go ahead and tell the truth here while we're talking. And, okay.
Just keep on going.
I'm going to move right along. How about that? Okay, and then 3 days later, on June the 5th, 2014, another meeting with the county Board of County Commissioners with the budget. And in that meeting, I believe this was the manager's proposal, amended proposal to provide 19.5 for fiscal year 2015 that we're very grateful for, and then to provide 139 from 2014 through 2020. And the wording, and we just lifted this straight from the presentation, is it focused on a sustainable, and man, that's the word we're all after, I think, a sustainable capital program with ongoing funding. And then just to reiterate that the sustainability and the long-term funding plan. And then we'll go to the succession law. It was adopted by the General Assembly on June 17, 2014, and it was effective on June 11, 2014. And it requires capital outlay funding of at least 19.5 and then 19.7 for 16, consistent, and I want to note that that is consistent with the county manager's proposed budget, and we're very appreciative. And but I just need to say there's $2 off, just for full disclosure on our part.
Let's take a look at the county funding from 2006-07 through 14-15. As we take a look at, in 2006-07, in regards to our capital needs, we were funded at right around $11 million. In 2007-08, that climbed all the way to a little over $20 million. But then you notice a decrease in 8-9, adjusted in 8-9, meaning cut. 2009-10, our funding drops all the way down to just over $4 million. 10-11, back up to $6 million. 2011 and 12 for capital needs for Union County Public Schools, it's a little over $200,000, or right around $200,000. 12-13, that climbs back up to a little over $5 million. 13-14, we started out at $3 million, and as Dr. Ellis said, we were very grateful to our county commissioners for adjusting that for our roofs and additional identified needs to almost 18, or right around $18 million. And for 14-15, as Dr. Ellis shared with you, that's 19.5 and some change. But as you look here, you can see a significant decrease in the capital funding for Union County Public Schools over these years. And it's a challenge as we will continue to try to maintain and repair our existing facilities. To put that in context, our facilities really fall under right about 6 million square feet of roofing. So that's a lot of buildings. Our campuses have multiple buildings, therefore they have different needs, they are of different ages, and for us to have this gap of funding really impacts our ability to look at preventative maintenance and to do the repairs that stops it from having an even larger increase in the cost to do the project.
And Dr. Wick, you're excluding new construction early on in those years. Because in 06, 07, 07, 08, and 08, 09, you were still building schools at that point, if I remember right?
There was still the Cuperson campus. This is looking at capital needs to repair our facilities.
So this excludes just.
This is not, no new
This
construction.
excludes all the new construction, because there's a
That's
whole
correct.
parallel program for new construction going on at the same time.
That's correct. So when you looked at and you add that funding up, that's average before the adjusted here over these years of just south of $4 million. Again, you can see how we came up to that $3,763,000 and change.
I don't know that we need to hash this out again. Let's don't, but I want to clarify, and Randy, I really like your definition, that, and I want to make sure I understand that we're working from things that last 10 years or more and things that last 5 years or less. Is that what I heard?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, because I think
That's
that.
what was passed.
I want to clarify for God and country. I want to make sure that I write that down right. One thing I think.
We got confusion down here.
Yeah. I thought what we had said was it was 5 years or more.
5 years old.
Yeah.
Just
So
5 years.
just,
Okay.
there were
5
two
years
parts.
or more.
Yes, big project.
Period. 5 years or more.
Big
I like 5 or more, period.
Yes.
That's much simpler. We can handle it. All right.
The only thing I would add to this slide, I think it's in your PowerPoint. You want to look as Mr. Yates shared with you, the differences between the two boards. It gives you an opportunity to see what our finance officer and what our Board of Education, what we have to work with in regards to defining capital outlay for us.
Now, this is our last slide. It was going to be the last thing we discussed, but I think it's very important that everybody around this table understand the CCEP. And we're going to talk with you maybe 2 or 3 minutes very briefly about that. And Mike, do you want to start off with it?
Well, as Dr. Ellis shared earlier, the community, the CCEP, let me say it that way, it's not a mouthful if I say CCEP for us. The whole goal of that is to engage our communities, engage the professionals as well, and begin to identify needs. Absolutely, there's going to be some wants in there as well as some needs. And it will be incumbent upon our Facilities Committee and our Board of Education to make sure that they sift through that stack of projects that's going to come in and make sure that they determine and identify what the true needs of our system are, so that they can take those needs and then turn those into a construction calendar and prioritize what year that we would need those projects completed in. And so that we as a committee can meet that goal of identifying projects, making sure that those projects, that we can meet the needs in regards to a construction calendar, and that most importantly, this committee finds a means to fund the projects that we need as a school system.
And I want to make sure everybody understands that there's skin in the game among stakeholders. The principals right now are working with their site-based team, which has parents with community members looking at what their individual schools' needs are. And that will be, the wants will be winnowed out to get down to what the absolute needs are. And we're hopeful, that's where I went out on a limb and said we're hopeful to have that to you by the end of the first Tuesday in March.
And we have a commitment from our facilities chair to meet and do what we need to do in the month of February to hit that deadline.
Randy, is that good enough?
Boy, you did well.
Robert, does that really address your concern that you raised and brought up some significant discussion tonight?
Which concerns
The
that?
one about just itemization and
Well, yeah, and I think it's just in the spirit of transparency, it was a question that I think we need to take a look at. It sounds like the mechanisms are in place to do that.
thank you.
Thank you.
One other thing, may I mention, please, chairs, co-chairs, I'm having a hard time, y'all need to sit beside each other. When we look for, you're talking about full transparency, we don't know the number that we're gonna come back with, the projected number, but I'm gonna try to ballpark it. Now, please do not anybody hold me to this number, but in the spirit of us trying to get our head around it, knowing that we already have identified 70-something million in needs, right? And then based on from this, that we believe that it'll end up being somewhere between 175 million and 250 million. Now, I'm hopeful it's on the lower end of it, but I do not know that, and I don't want anybody to come back and say, whoo! But when we're looking at the things, I think 4 or 5 schools have already submitted, and we're looking, and staff is working diligently on the different systems and infrastructure and things of that nature, that if we're sitting at 70-something million now, it'll be at least 100 to make it 175 up to 250. I'm hopeful that it won't go that far, but I don't want to sit here and tell you folks a lie intentionally, okay? So in the interest of absolute full disclosure, that is our best guess as of this moment, with only 5 schools, that's sort of like the polls, only 5 of 53 reporting.
Now, what does that encompass and over what time frame?
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
What does the 175 to 250 encompass and over what time frame?
Or I don't know what it will. It will not be new school construction, let me say that.
So that's ex-new school.
Right,
Okay.
that absent new schools. And we're hopeful to have this to you by the end of the first Tuesday, after the board meets in March, what that listing, and it will be a listing of items, and it will be prioritized through the facilities and the full board.
Is it over a 5-year, 10-year, 2-year, 1 year? What's the time span?
Ms. Cotto, we build ours over a 5-year period.
Okay.
I guess my question, every school is going to have their list of wants and needs. So I assume your prioritization will be the total system.
Right.
And to be
Right.
facetious, if Marvin Ridge wants a new stadium and Sun Valley wants a new stadium, you know.
Well, to be very honest with you, on the CFS, I think Marvin Ridge wanted AstroTurf, and we still don't have AstroTurf. Now, just to be very honest with you.
Well, when we were talking about the transparency, to me, what I would like to see is as much detail as we can. Like if we're talking about in general roofs, well, let's talk about what school, because there could be, well, roofs are pretty basic. I think if you need a roof, you need a roof.
And we even put by subsections of roof.
Yeah, okay, so
There might be
do
20,
it
there might be
that way.
20
You can break it
sections of
down
a
that
roof.
much.
So we would say section 1.1 or 21.1 or, and,
A and C 1.1, administration versus cafeteria.
Okay, yeah, because when we're talking transparency, to me, what that means is share with us as much detail as you can. I think that that'll help communication overall and help us understand where we're coming from.
Any other comments following?
I will say that this past year, we tried to overshare with the Board of County Commissioners as far as details. In the past, we've just given what the needs were, but we tried to attach documents and anything, and we will certainly try to do that.
Yes,
for the group.
overshare with us and we will try to work through it and figure out what the best thing is.
Good. Any other comments? Item number 8, just look at this discussion of development of multi-year plan and associated prioritization. The multi-year plan, I think we've worked pretty well on that tonight with the first draft of the CEP coming. I'm just taking a look at my notes here and gathering information, as well as the funding. Jeff, we'll work on next meeting, right? Now, associated prioritization, I believe we all agreed during the meeting that that wasn't our job, that the prioritization really would take place within the county. Now, I may be wrong on this, that's why I'm asking. The county board would take its input and send it to the county commissioners. Is that accurate, Ms. Coda?
Well, I kind of interpreted that this group would look at the needs that come out of the CCEP, did I get that right? Okay.
Yeah.
And I assume that will come with some recommendations as to priorities.
It
That's
will.
correct.
And then, and I would think that that's something that we would look at in
So
totality.
you would look at that too, because that's what I was, we had said something earlier in the meeting about prioritization does not fall under our auspice, but
With the understanding that things change.
Correct, and we prioritize those by the years at which,
Okay.
within that construction calendar.
okay. Any more discussion then about item 8? I want everybody to feel comfortable with this process. Okay. Future meeting dates, times, locations. And I do believe the next one we will host, since you were so gracious to host us with the crackers and one. Quiche would have been wonderful, but
We might have a carving station.
pizza, we'll have pizza for us next to me. Randy suggested pizza.
We will be happy to provide a meal. I know I haven't had dinner yet. We will be happy to provide a meal at the next meeting whenever we decide if that's agreeable with the group, and then you guys can do it next time.
What are our thoughts on our next meeting with November and December coming, and does anybody have any?
Well, we have homework assignments, correct?
Right.
What does the group think the time necessary to complete those homework assignments?
Ours will be done after the board meeting, the first Tuesday night in March, with your priority.
So I'm
I'm not saying I think we need to wait till March to meet.
Okay.
No. You're asking when our homework assignments are due.
To send the links.
Would it be
We need to send the
appropriate?
links
Would
tomorrow.
it be appropriate for you to give us, Mike, an update on how the progression of the CCEP and the schools that have come in, and just to let us know kind of how that's progressing? You know, we may get it done before. I'm just.
Don't give the man a stroke, please. Well, Jeff, how long would it take you to put together the concept or the presentation about financing and?
That's what I was gonna ask next.
I mean, we can do it whenever the committee would like. You know, obviously not this week probably, but it's at the pleasure of one. It's not something that'll take months to put together, so.
Unfortunately, we don't have too many options, so,
You
yeah.
just tell me when you'd like to do it and we'll be ready.
First, second week of December.
I will have some scheduling conflicts because for me, I have already some pre-planned engagements the first week or two.
So the 24th is always up.
About 5 o'clock that evening.
Jeff, as we're talking about December, what would after the first of the year? I don't want to prolong this, but I'm just wondering, even if we wait until after the first of the year, because we know what kind of time elements, the school system's going to be doing, and it looks like the major discussion of the meeting would be with funding. Since you've agreed to add that to your assessment.
I think January, I mean, I don't functionally see a problem with doing it in January because the funding sources between here and there aren't going to change because they're really just sources. They're, to the degree you use them, is they're not really relevant to the conversation at that point.
Thursday the 8th.
How about Randy suggesting Thursday, January the 8th?
Any other nights work for anybody?
Thursdays are
Thursday
a dance
night?
night for a
Thursday.
couple of us.
What?
Dance, scouts.
Friday night?
What are good nights? Let's talk a little bit about good nights then.
My husband's on lunch 3 days a week, so.
What about a Tuesday? What about a Tuesday night?
Tuesdays are great.
Tuesday's good.
Tuesday's good.
If we don't have a Board of Education meeting,
Yeah,
that's the first Tuesday.
that is the first.
That is the
You know,
first
in
Tuesday. That's the
January,
first
it's not the
Tuesday.
first Tuesday. I think it's the
Second
second
Tuesday.
Tuesday in January.
So let's do the 13th.
Or maybe, wait a minute, maybe it is first.
Third, the 5th of
So
January.
Find a day.
First
We're gonna
Tuesday.
find a
We'll
day.
find a
It's the
date.
sixth.
We gotta find a
It's
date.
the first
We
Tuesday.
don't have a
It's the
choice.
first Tuesday in January, I'm sorry.
Okay, so that would be January the
The sixth.
6th, okay,
How about the 13th?
13th.
or the
That's
13th.
you all's
I won't be
meeting.
here on the 13th, so.
Let's do this.
You
Okay.
gotta change plans, man.
Mr. Taylor, what does Jeff
County
do
has
with all
already paid
this?
for, I'd hate to waste the
Sorry.
money.
Sorry.
I mean, I
We can
know
work it
the
out.
5th is the first day back from vacation and stuff like that for a lot of people, but it's Monday the 5th.
Monday, we meet.
We
Oh,
meet-
that's
They meet
right,
on
that's
Monday,
right,
yeah.
that's right.
We meet the Tuesday, so the Wednesday,
Wednesday the 7th?
How about Monday the 7th?
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Excuse me, Wednesday the 7th.
I have conflicts, but I'll be glad to defer.
Wednesday's
We
not
can
a
do it
good day
Thursday.
for me.
Don't plan too far ahead, there, Kevin.
Planning
Planning way too far ahead.
January the 9th, was that the 20th?
Thursday, the 8th?
I just think, I don't know, that maybe that pushes us
What's
too far.
January the 20th? Is that too far? 13th?
Is
January the 20th too far?
No?
Well, is there anything else we need to talk about before we get into the whole nitty gritty?
Well, that was the next thing I was gonna ask, just to be sure we've covered everything for homework that we need to do.
Are we doing the 20th, or are we doing the 8th?
Why don't we do the 8th?
Thursday, the 8th.
Let's get moving.
All right.
We will be more than happy to host. I will, let me work on a location that we can get good sound from, and we will provide dinner. And are we talking 6:30? Is that what we're talking again? Then if we have dinner at 6 p.m., would that be okay?
Does everyone agree with dinner at 6, meeting at 6:30 on January the 8th? And it'll be,
Call the pizza guy about 5:15. We're gonna need it 6.
You said you would let us know where the location was?
and we're, location.
If our culinary arts class, this is the first year for them at Porter Ridge High School, if they're cooking by then, they may be a spiced apple cake earlier in the week for the high school principals meeting. If they're cooking, we will ask them to serve us
That
to
sounds
feed us from our culinary
And
arts.
location?
I will get back to everybody on that.
Okay.
And if they're cooking, it'll more likely be at Porter Ridge.
You don't cater?
But we've got to see if we're there yet.
Any more topics for their next meeting?